You are live with Sky News Breakfast. It's Leah here. It's 6 o'clock. We're hearing from the Conservatives of the opposition in Canada, Pierre Poilievre. He's conceding defeat. Carney, Mark Carney's Liberal Party, are projected to have won this election. So let's just listen in to the rest of what he has to say.
Unionized workers, youth, new Canadians. We gave voices to countless people across this country who've been left out and left behind for far too long. We won the big debates of our time on the carbon tax, on inflation, on housing, on the drug crisis, on crime. Conservatives have been leading the debate, and we will continue to put forward the best arguments to improve the lives of our people right across this country. But we will not stop there. Every single day, our Conservative caucus and I will be holding the government to account on behalf of the millions of Canadians who believed in the message of change. En tant que parti, on a grandement élargi notre soutien et chaque jour, le caucus conservateur et moi allons travailler à Ottawa pour rendre des comptes du gouvernement au nom des millions de Canadiens qui ont décidé de voter pour un vrai changement. J'ai eu l'honneur de parcourir le pays et parler aux milliers de personnes qui ont partagé leurs préoccupations, leurs peines, leurs espoirs. Everywhere I went, hard-working people took precious time out of their day to tell me about their struggles, their pain, their fears, but also their hopes and dreams. Welders and waitresses, farmers and factory workers, seniors, small business owners, and single mothers, young Canadians and young families pleading for the chance to own a home, parents who worried that their kids would never be able to move out of their home, grandparents who saw their grandchildren suffering from the shortfalls of our economy, and countless others who are afraid to go outside because of the rising wave of crime. All of these stories touched my heart and gave me inspiration to work towards something better. These people continue to need voices, and I will continue to fight for them every day, and every day we will never give up on fighting for the Canadian people. Thank you. We hear your stories. We will carry those stories with us into Parliament. We will not forget the people for whom we work and for whom we fight every day. Now, I know that some of you might be disappointed that change did not get over the finish line tonight. Change takes time. Most of all, it requires that we never give up, because our people and our country are worth fighting for. Je vous ai entendu et j'ai apporté vos histoires avec moi tout au long de cette campagne. Et vos histoires vont rester avec moi lorsque je me bats avec mon équipe conservatrice pour vous défendre et pour avancer vos intérêts. À ceux qui ont désespéré besoin de changement, je sais que vous êtes déçus. Le changement est difficile et ça prend du temps. Surtout, ça veut dire qu'on peut jamais lâcher. Parce que notre pays et son peuple méritent qu'on se batte pour eux. I will never give up on fighting for everyone who stood with us today and the millions of people who voted for other parties. And so, my message tonight, for the single mother working 2 jobs but still has an empty fridge and an empty bank account, for the young people who despair at never being able to afford a home, for the seniors on fixed incomes whose savings are eroded by inflation and no longer feel safe in their local neighborhood parks, for those who are now living in fear and terror because of crime, for those worried about losing their jobs because of unacceptable tariffs from the United States of America, for all of those who feel left behind and forgotten, my message is one of hope. Change will take time, but we will fight for that change, and we will deliver that change, and we will never give up on fighting for the great Canadian promise that anyone from anywhere can achieve anything, that hard work gets you a great life in a beautiful house on a safe street protected by our brave troops under our proud flag. Canada first, Canada always. Let's bring it home. Thank you very much, Canada. Merci beaucoup, Canada.
Yeah, we fight for what's right.
Yeah, that was the Conservative leader conceding defeat there in this election, Pierre Poilievre, insinuating that he will not step down, he'll continue to fight. Let's go live now to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who's been at Carney HQ all morning for us. He joins us now. James, just give us a sense, first of all, of the mood of the night that you've experienced. Good morning to you.
Yeah, hi, good morning to you, Leah. Buoyant. And you hear the party, you hear the music behind me, and there's something like 200-300 people gathered here. It was 2-3 hours ago when the national broadcaster, CBC, called it for Mark Carney, and there were cheers inside here. Every now and again, flashing up on the TV screen are pictures of him and his wife watching the results coming in. We're expecting him to appear here in something like 20 minutes, and of course we can broadcast that live, but he's the winner. I suppose if there is some disappointment, that disappointment is that it looks like it could well be a minority government, not the majority that he craved. So that will test his political acumen, an acumen that has been well on display and that has carried him to high office, because he's the candidate who tapped into the national mood, styled himself as the anti-Trump candidate, and that harnessed this sense of national unity, a response to Donald Trump's tariffs and to his threat to annex Canada as America's 51st state. So Canadians, they wanted change. They had grown tired of Carney's Liberals, but that all changed when Donald Trump had Canada in his crosshairs. We expect him, as I say, Leah, to appear here in something like 15-20 minutes. I'm looking at the cameras around me, who seem to be sharpening their focus, which tells me it might not be too far away. But it'll be interesting. Clearly, it will be a victory speech. Interesting to hear his thoughts on a minority government, if that's how he sees the night developing. But also, maybe we'll hear from him about the road ahead, how he deals with Donald Trump, because that has been a central issue in this election.
And James, Mark Carney, he positioned himself, didn't he, as the leader that will take on US President Donald Trump, who's quite robust in all of his speeches in regard to those tariffs. Now he'll have to come good, I suppose.
There will always.
Yeah, time will tell as to how effective he is and whether he can walk the walk. But certainly Carney, he talked up the danger as he saw it of Donald Trump, speaking about an existential threat to Canada, the most significant crisis, he called it, in their lives. And of course he presented himself as the man to do something about it. The polls had long established Carney as the choice of Canadians to take on or to take the fight to Donald Trump, largely because of his finance background. You know, he is a man comfortable in his own skin, reassuringly grey, and, you know, clearly has a financial expertise. He was the Bank of England governor, he was the Bank of Canada governor, and as such he has crisis management on his CV, you know, through the financial crisis or the crash of 2008, and of course through Britain's Brexit. So that's the case that he presented to Canadians, saying, look, I know the economy, I know finance, I've got the track record, I've dealt with Donald Trump in different spheres. I dealt with him at the top table as a finance man when he was president first time around, and that earned the trust of Canadians. Somebody who knew the subject matter, this very subject matter that he will be discussing and disputing with Donald Trump, and that is the case for election that was bought by Canadians at large. But as I say, not enough, seemingly, and this is yet to be confirmed, but it looks like it won't be enough to give him that majority government, and that will present challenges for him politically. You know, the political instincts, the politics in the raw that are required, personality, schmoozing, working with people. That's what matters in terms of negotiating a path with, through a minority parliament where you're seeking friends, looking to build relationships. That's not something that's necessarily taught in the textbooks of Harvard and Oxford, but of course Carney studied in the institutions that propelled him to high finance and fortune.
OK, James, thanks so much. We can see lots of activity on the stage behind you, so as soon as we do hear from Mark Carney, we'll head back to James there in Ottawa. Moving on now, power is finally being restored to some areas of Spain and Portugal. This is following one of the largest blackouts in recent history. Authorities say there's no evidence so far of a cyber attack, but say it could take days to be fully resolved. Sky's Ashna Hurinag reports.
Carnage in Spain's capital. No traffic lights at this roundabout makes for an almost lawless scene as cars and pedestrians navigate the disorder. It's a picture replicated across the country and in Portugal too. Both nations entirely cut off from power. As the train network grounded to a halt, some stranded passengers in Valencia walked the rest of their journeys. Railway lines deserted and phone lines dead. By lunchtime, office workers poured onto the streets, dazed and disconnected.
We were working very well. Suddenly the computer went down. We thought it was a normal blackout, as it happens sometimes, but then we heard it was a cyber attack. This was through information through the poor connection we had to the internet. After that, we stopped having any comms, no access to the internet, nothing.
Passengers wanting to travel in and out of the countries are desperate for movement. That's simply not happening. Flights in and out are either severely delayed or cancelled. Here at Madrid Airport and Barcelona too are running off emergency contingency generators. There are queues everywhere you look, for taxi stands, for information desks, people desperate for some nugget of news. The dropout blamed on Spain's electricity grid. Portuguese grid officials say due to extreme temperature variations in the interior of Spain, there were anomalous oscillations in the very high voltage lines, a phenomenon known as induced atmospheric vibration. It's estimated that full normalisation of the network could take up to a week. 2 countries thrown into darkness, and the cause is still unknown. Ashna Hurinag, Sky News in Madrid.
Back here, the government has announced plans to change the law to prevent people convicted of sex offences in the UK or abroad from claiming asylum. They hope the changes will help tighten border security. I'm joined in the studio by Mari Aurora, our political correspondent. Great to see you, as always. So tell me a bit more about these details. What are they hoping to get across today?
So the government is trying to demonstrate that they are being tough on immigration and asylum and foreign criminals. That's the kind of headline here, cracking down on foreign criminals. So what they're arguing is that anyone who is convicted of an offence and therefore is on the sex offenders register, that they will be denied refugee status. So essentially, this is going to be an amendment to the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill in Parliament. And what they're saying is, at the moment, the Refugee Convention, it enables countries to refuse asylum to a certain group of people. So terrorists to start, war criminals as another, and then those convicted of particularly serious crimes that might be a danger to the public, so anything possibly above 12 months sentence. And what they're saying is they are adding sex offenders to that list of people who therefore can be refused asylum in the UK. They're also talking about other things, such as using AI for asylum claims as well to try and speed up the process. But if we focus on the sex offenders register, as it were, for the moment, now, this is what they're arguing is a way to try and really kind of crack down on foreign criminals. The difficulty is the government won't give us any numbers. Excuse me, so they won't give us any numbers on how many foreign nationals are on the sex offenders register. So we don't actually know how many people this might affect, how many people we expect this to affect in the future. So it's really difficult to understand the scale of this because they won't give us the numbers. And so critics have argued, actually, is this going to really do much? So if you hear from the attack kind of rebuttal from the Conservative Party, for instance, they say that actually this isn't going to do anything, that they would want to disapply the Human Rights Act to those entering the UK possibly illegally, and that might make a difference, but that Labour refused to do that when the Tories were in power. And this all comes on a backdrop of huge surging small boats crossing. So actually the highest on record since records began. We understand at Sky News that it's now past 10,000 since the beginning of the year. That is a record, and therefore the difficulty is we had Keir Starmer speaking to Beth Rigby, our political editor, yesterday on Sky News, saying that the Tories lost control of our borders, and Beth replied to him and said, well, so have you. And many people would be forgiven for saying, actually, Labour's record is worse than the Conservatives so far when it comes to illegal immigration and small boats crossings. So there's the government trying to say that they are cracking down, but it's in massively stark contrast to the numbers, the cold, hard facts, which is that, unfortunately, numbers continue to go up, and we still don't know how effective this new change to the bill will actually be.
Mari, great stuff, as always. And at 7:15, Wilfred Frost will be joined by the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, so we can rip apart those plans a little deeper. But in the meantime, let's take a look at some of the day's other news for you. Belfast-based rap trio Kneecap have apologised to the families of murdered MPs Joe Cox and David Amess. They say they didn't intend to cause harm after a video from 2023 appeared to show a band member urging people to kill Tory MPs. The Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has called for prosecution. There are calls for the government to require all new homes to be built with solar panels. The local government association says the move could cut both household bills and meet climate change targets. Currently, 40% of new homes built have solar panels. The sugar tax applied to fizzy drinks could now be extended to milkshakes under new proposals. The government is consulting on proposals to end the exemption from the tax for dairy-based drinks, as well as non-dairy substitutes, that's oats and rice. The Treasury said young people only receive 3.5% of their calcium intakes from such drinks. Donald Trump's tariff war was an attempt to assert American dominance on the global economic market. China, the world's second largest economy, has put up the biggest fight, but their clash is having direct consequences on other countries. Sky's Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch has been to Vietnam to see how they're being affected.
On the Saigon River, you can see and feel Vietnam's miracle growth story. But it's one of the most trade-dependent countries in the world.
Today, about 30% of Vietnam's exports go to the United States. Last year, it accounted for about 30% of its gross domestic product. But Vietnam imports very little from America, creating the kind of trade deficit Trump really doesn't like. Ultimately, if he decides to impose anything like 46% tariffs here, it could be very damaging to the economy.
The government moved fast to try and cut a deal, offering 0% tariffs on US goods. But that was seen as pretty cosmetic. America wants Vietnam to show some muscle.
If you're Vietnam going into these trade talks with America, what would you be offering?
To buy American products. If Vietnam goes into trade talks saying that we will be a reliable manufacturer of the core products that you need and a reliable buyer of the core products that America wants to sell, I think the outcome could be good.
And do you think they'll achieve that balance?
I hope so. The question is, how much does China also have the ear of the Vietnamese negotiators?
Cutting Big Brother loose isn't an option. China has a massive footprint here. But Donald Trump wants a major gear change. He claims China's using its neighbour to sell products illegally, shipping them stateside with Made in Vietnam labels. That claim is hard to assess. But down by the river, They question the logic and likelihood of America stepping in to do what they've spent years finessing.
The
United States GDP is so high. It's the largest in the world right now. What's the point of trying to get the jobs from developing countries like Vietnam and other Asian nations? It's unnecessary. It makes America look weaker to me than it used to be.
The US relies on Vietnam for clothing, but on the factory floors of Ho Chi Minh City, the whole fabric of their industry could change.
One of the things this factory produces is cheerleading outfits for export to America. Now, even though the tariffs are currently on pause, they're already feeling the effects here. They're working overtime, trying to press through with orders before the deadline.
Thankfully, this factory's...
OK, we can listen in now to Diana Fox Carney, Mark Carney's wife now.
And he said to me, he stopped the conversation and he said to me, I want you to know I'm committed to move back to Canada and to work in the public service. So here we are. As his partner, I could not be more proud of him. And as a Canadian, I'm so thankful that the man I met more than 30 years ago has held tight to that strong commitment to service. I'm lucky to have him. We're lucky to have him now more than ever. Without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce my husband, the Prime Minister who will make Canada strong. And Canada
That is Nepean. That is the spirit of Nepean behind me right there. Thank you. Bonsoir tout le monde. Bonsoir. Oh, quel bonsoir. C'est un bon bonsoir. I have a question. Who's ready? Who's ready? Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me? And who's ready? Who's ready to build Canada strong? Okay, we got that settled. That's good. Avant de commencer, je voudrais féliciter les autres chefs de parti, de leur campagne et de tout le travail qu'ils ont fait. Je les remercie pour leur service envers le Canada, maintenant et dans le futur. I want to thank the leaders of the other parties. I want to salute the contribution of Jagmeet Singh. I noticed his remarks. Leading on progressive values. Elizabeth May, who will be returning. François Blanchet. And I want to congratulate Pierre Poilievre on a hard-fought, fair, good campaign, his commitment to the country that we both love. They all have many, many more contributions to our land. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Diana, for your work on this campaign. Thank you, Diana, for the commitment and compassion you bring to everything that you do. Tonight simply would not have been possible without you and without the support of our 4 children who inspire me to service every single day. I also want to salute the women and men who put their name on the ballot from all parties. Thank you for standing up to serve our country at this critical time. And for those who were elected, particularly those Liberals who were elected, I am looking forward to working together to deliver for Canadians. This is Bruce. And Bruce, yes, Bruce Vanjoy. I'm looking forward to working with Bruce Vanjoy. Fantastic. He will be a great MP. We're going to have fun tonight. Yes, we're going to have fun. Bien sûr, je tiens à remercier les milliers de bénévoles ici ce soir et à travers le pays qui ont donné de leur temps pour cogner au port, pour faire des appels, pour échanger avec leurs voisins et les membres de leur communauté, pour nous donner un gouvernement fort. Ouais, c'est ça. You know, I chose to enter politics because I felt we needed big changes in this country. But big changes guided by strong Canadian values. Values that I learned at the dinner table from my parents, Bob and Verley, and from my siblings. I appreciate this more in retrospect from my siblings. My siblings, Brenda, Sean, and Brian. Values that I learned on the ice from my coaches. Values that have been reinforced as I've met with Canadians across this great country. And those include three values that I want to highlight this evening. Humility. It's Canada after all. Ambition. It's Canada after all. And unity. It's Canada. I love you. Right back. Right back. These are good values. These are Canadian values. Values that I will do my best. I'm just getting worked up here. These are values that I will do my best to uphold every day as your Prime Minister. You betcha. Okay, well, you have to judge after this next section because I am going to begin with the value of humility. And by admitting that I have much to be humble about. It's true. Over my long, that's not an applause line, it's just a statement of fact. Over my long career, I have made many mistakes, and I will make more. But I commit to admitting them openly, to correcting them quickly, and always learning from them. Humility underscores the importance of governing as a team in cabinet and in caucus, and working constructively with all parties across Parliament, of working in partnership with the provinces and the territories, and with Indigenous peoples. And at this time, it underscores the value of bringing together labor, business, civil society, to advance the nation-building investments we need to transform our economy. Humility is also about recognizing that one of the responsibilities of government is to prepare for the worst, not hope for the best. As I've been warned, America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. Never. But these are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen. But we also must recognize the reality that our world has fundamentally changed. There is also, for me, as I stand before you this evening, humility in recognizing that, well, many have chosen to place your trust in me, trust in the Liberal Party. Millions of our fellow citizens preferred a different outcome. And my message to every Canadian is this: no matter where you live, no matter what language you speak, no matter how you voted, I will always do my best to represent everyone who calls Canada home. You know, during this short campaign, I went to Saskatchewan and Alberta a couple of times, even though, you know, we're liberals. It's tough. It's tough out there. I grew up there. But I went because I intend to govern for all Canadians. And au cours de cette campagne, plusieurs Québécois et Québécoises m'ont ouvert leurs portes, m'ont accordé leur confiance. J'en suis profondément touché et je vous en remercie. La langue française. La langue française, la culture québécoise, elles sont au cœur de l'identité canadienne. Elles définissent le pays que j'aime tant. Et je vais les défendre sans relâche. Avec la forte équipe de députés québécois que vous venez d'envoyer à Ottawa, nous allons faire en sorte que le Québec continue de prospérer au sein d'un Canada fort. Et que vous soyez un travailleur des sables bitumineux à Fort Mac, une infirmière de Joliette ou un comptable de Toronto. Il y a plusieurs comptables à Toronto. Mon gouvernement va travailler pour vous tous. So, as we come here after this most consequential election, let's put an end to the division and anger of the past. We are all Canadian, and my government will work for and with everyone. I began with humility, but Canadians are ambitious. And now, more than ever, it is a time for ambition. It is a time to be bold, to meet this crisis with overwhelming positive force of a united Canada. Because we are going to build, baby, build. Exactly. Throughout, not for, well, no, we're building now. We've gotten over that bit. Throughout our history, there have been turning points. Throughout our history, there have been turning points when the world's fortunes were in the balance. That was the case at the start of the Second World War, just as it was at the end of the Cold War. And each time, Canada chose to step up, to assert ourselves as a free, sovereign, and ambitious nation, to lead the path of democracy and freedom, and, because we are Canadian, to do so with compassion and generosity. We are once again at one of those hinge moments of history. Our old relationship with the United States, a relationship based on steadily increasing integration, is over. The system of open global trade, anchored by the United States, a system that Canada has relied on since the Second World War, a system that, while not perfect, has helped deliver prosperity for our country for decades, is over. But it's also our new reality. We are over the shock of the American betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons.
But you're going to take us forward.
We have to look out for ourselves, and above all, we have to take care of each other. When I sit down with President Trump, it will be to discuss the future economic and security relationship between two sovereign nations. And it will be with our full knowledge that we have many, many other options than the United States to build prosperity for all Canadians. Nous allons renforcer nos relations avec des partenaires fiables en Europe, en Asie et ailleurs. Et si les États-Unis ne veulent plus jouer un rôle de premier plan dans l'économie mondiale, le Canada leur fera. We will lead, not the Americans. Nous sommes maîtres chez nous. Nous allons bâtir des millions de logements, une superpuissance énergétique, de bonnes carrières dans les emplois spécialisés et une seule économie canadienne, pas 13. We will chart a new path forward because this is Canada and we decide what happens here. We will need to think big and act bigger. Your phone's ringing. Sorry, just go. All right. Just hang on. It's okay? Yeah. That might be important. We will need to do things previously thought impossible at speeds we haven't seen in generations. It's time to build twice as many homes every year with an entirely new housing industry using Canadian technology, Canadian skilled workers, Canadian lumber. It's time to build new trade and energy corridors, working in partnership with the provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples. It's time to build hundreds of thousands of not just good jobs, but good careers in the skilled trades. It's time to build Canada into an energy superpower in both clean and conventional energy. And it's time to build an industrial strategy that makes Canada more competitive while fighting climate change. We will build a Canadian economy, not 13, with a government committed to free trade in Canada by Canada Day. The point is that we can give ourselves far more than the Americans can ever take away. But even given that, I want to be clear. The coming days and months will be challenging, and they will call for some sacrifices. But we will share those sacrifices by supporting our workers and our businesses. Les défis devant nous sont intimidants, et c'est normal. Les grands changements, comme ceux que nous vivons, sont toujours inquiétants. Nous avons beaucoup de chemin à faire, mais j'ai confiance. J'ai confiance en vous. J'ai confiance au Canada. Because Canada is more than a nation. We are and we always will be a confederation, a sacred set of ideas and ideals built on practical foundations. That we know we're not always perfect, but we always strive to be good. We do things because they're right, not because they're easy. That we see kindness as a virtue, not as a weakness. Most importantly, we know that our strength lies in our resolve to work together as a country. It relies on our unity. You know, on the second day of this campaign, I went to Gander, where on 9/11, they welcomed thousands of passengers into their homes without question or hesitation. I sat down with two of the many heroes of the time, Diane Davis and Beulah Cooper. And during our conversation, they showed me a thank you card that they'd received from a young girl called Ellie, who wrote, "Your kindness motivates me to use my kindness." That touching phrase captures what Canadians instinctively know, that virtue is like a muscle that grows with its exercise. We become just by doing just acts, brave by doing brave acts. When we are kind, kindness grows. When we seek unity, unity grows. When we are Canadian, Canada grows. And united over our history, we have done hard, seemingly impossible things. United, we have built one nation in harsh conditions, despite a sometimes hostile neighbor. Yes, they have form on this, the Americans. United, we have confronted our own past with Indigenous peoples. Unis, nous avons bâti un pays qui rassemble des langues, des cultures et des croyances différentes. Unis, nous avons bâti des institutions culturelles essentielles comme CBC Radio-Canada. United, we have created universal public health care. And now, in the face of this crisis, united, we are buying Canadian. We are exploring everything this country has to offer. We are supporting our friends and neighbors in the crosshairs of President Trump through a crisis that we did not create. United and build the strongest economy in the G7, an economy that works for everyone. Au cours des derniers mois, les Canadiens et Canadiennes ont fait leur part, se sont rassemblés pour défendre notre pays et notre façon d'être. Je promets que, lorsque nous sommes menacés, nous allons nous battre. We will fight back with everything we have to get the best deal for Canada. We will protect our workers and businesses, and above all, we will build an independent future for our great country. A future that makes the greatest country on the earth even better. Together, we will build a Canada worthy of our values. We will build Canada strong, Canada free, Canada forever. Vive le Canada. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Well, that was the victory speech of Mark Carney. Canadian media projecting that Mark Carney's Liberal Party has won the election. We can now speak to Mark Benning, a close friend of Mark Carney's from his time at Harvard University. Mark, you would have heard that speech there by your friend. Just give us your reaction then to what he was saying. Robust message also for US President Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think, I think he accepted the leadership humbly. Yet at the same time, he wants to fight for a strong Canada. And that is, that's Mark Carney. He's a, very hardworking sort of person who cares deeply about Canada and Canadians and doesn't want to see the country be disrespected by anybody, and will fight hard for its people.
I just wonder, Mark, just looking back on your time at Harvard University, did you ever imagine he would make that leap into politics, let alone win an election as Canadian media is projecting?
I did. He's always been devoted to public service. So, even though we were going to university in the United States, he would always mention that he wanted to go back and work in Canada and be involved in public service. And so that's something that it's always been a big part of him. And so having achieved the role of prime minister, I'm very happy for him, very excited for our country that we've elected somebody like Mark Carney.
Have you been in touch with him recently? I wonder what you think his mindset is now, because although lots of support that we heard in that room there, he's got big challenges ahead, hasn't he?
He does. Right now, it looks like it could be a minority government. And, that's a lot harder to govern a country as part of a minority government versus a majority. I hope the polls are still, or the count is still coming in. So I am hoping that he actually does achieve a majority, but it's looking like that is going to be pretty close. And so that'll pose, more challenges for somebody like him.
Can you give us any stories about the man behind this public image that we're seeing today? Of course, he has that strong family behind him, his wife and children too. But any stories you remember from the man behind this public image that we're seeing?
Yeah, Mark's he's a fun guy. Like, as you can see in his speeches and everything, he's got a great sense of humor. And he's always got a smile on his face. He's got a positive attitude, and he's somebody that you want to be around. He and I one Christmas took a trip to visit my brother, who is based in Toronto, Canada, and my brother took us to a U2 concert at Maple Leaf Gardens, and it was a spectacular event. And Mark was really thankful afterwards for joining us on that.
And he did say, didn't he, Mark, that he's going to govern for all Canadians, that, Canadians have to think big but act bigger. Is he the man then, just last thoughts on Mark here, is he the man to take on Donald Trump and really build back a better, a bigger Canada?
Absolutely. I think he can, not just take on Trump, but try to negotiate something for the benefit of Canada. It's not just fighting Trump that matters. It's actually the negotiation of a trade deal and a security deal that works for both Canada and the U.S. And someone like Mark he's super smart, and he's a good negotiator, and he's somebody that gets along really well with people. So I'm very confident that he'll be able to figure something out and work out a negotiation with the U.S. that works for both countries.
What was Mark like back at Harvard University in terms of his leadership back then? Did he stand out even then?
Well, he definitely did. He's, like I said before, he's super smart. I took a couple classes with him, and he's the type of person that understands things very quickly. So, where it might take me an hour to understand a concept that the professor was teaching us, or, a set of work, it might take Mark Carney 10 minutes for the same thing. And he just is a very quick study of things. He's, he works incredibly hard. And so he doesn't take things for granted. He actually, works at stuff and gets results. So I saw a lot of the traits that make him, or will make him, a great leader today, back in those days at Harvard.
OK, we'll leave it there. Mark, really great to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
OK, let's go live now to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who was listening to that speech by Mark Carney. James, your thoughts? It's a wide-ranging speech, obviously, but quite buoyant.
Yeah, buoyant and belligerent, I would say, Leah, particularly on the subject of the day and the subject of this election, America and Canada's relationship with Donald Trump. I mean, some of the lines leapt out or leapt from that stage. America wants our land, our resources, our country. Never, he said. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never happen. Our world has fundamentally changed. This is a hinge moment in history. Integration is over. He spoke about American betrayal and giving an insight into how discussions might go with President Trump. on trade, tariffs, on the wish of Donald Trump to annex Canada. He said, we have other options to build prosperity. Essentially, his message will be, look, we're going to build in Canada with Canadian resources, and we're going to look for other friends and partnerships in the world. America is Canada's largest trading partner. 80% nearly of exports from this country go south of the border to the United States. So clearly there is an integration. Clearly Canada is facing what Carney calls an existential threat, but a serious danger to its economy from Donald Trump's stance since he took office. So that in terms of how it's addressed by Canada, we've got an insight into that, I think, from Mark Carney. Robust, and that's what's got him onto that stage as the next Prime Minister of this country. He styled himself as the man best placed to tackle the nemesis next door, to take on Donald Trump, somebody who was across his financial, economic brief, so well placed to discuss and dispute the subject matter at hand.
OK, James Matthews, always a pleasure to chat to you. There's definitely a bass in that music, isn't there, Mari? The party is really kicking in Canada. I want to join them. But not any political leanings.
Canadian is interesting because Canadians, they are really nice. I know it's a stereotype, but they are so nice.
Very neutral,
It always comes across, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, who doesn't like a good bass in some music? Should we talk the papers? I love this part of the show because it's a great moment to sort of peel back the layers to stories that we haven't managed to get into in the top of the show. Yes. So we're going to kick off with the Daily Mail. And we were talking about this yesterday. It's almost like maybe they were listening, the good people at the Daily Mail. But front page here, now Labour is facing a summer of discontent. Nurses, teachers, council staff, they're all saying, look, we're not paid enough. We want a pay rise. If you don't deliver, we're going on strike.
Well, this is the thing. So the Daily Mail is kind of branding this as a possible summer of discontent for the Labour Party. Now, it's too early to tell yet whether people are going to go on strike or not. There might be lots of conversations happening behind closed doors, between unions, between government, between workers. But what is interesting is yesterday at a lobby briefing in Downing Street, the Prime Minister's spokesperson was very explicit about the fact that any extra money that needed to be found, essentially, for these pay rises, if they do accept the pay review body's recommendations, which we expect them to do so, anything above that 2.8% that they have budgeted for already is going to have to come out of existing budgets, i.e. cuts. And we know that the unions have said that that's not going to be acceptable to them. So just to remind viewers, if for anyone who wasn't watching yesterday, the expectation that we're hearing reported so far is a 4% pay rise for teachers and a 3% pay rise for NHS staff. And just to give you that quote from the Prime Minister's spokesperson, he said there'll be no additional funding for pay if recommended awards exceed what departments can afford. Daniel Kobidi, who is the General Secretary of the National Education Union, has talked about how workers stand ready to act industrially if we need to. And Joe Galbraith-Martin of the Royal College of Nursing, so speaking on behalf of some NHS workers, has said that members are being balloted on what action, including industrial action, they might be prepared to take, and saying that that pay award, that 3% pay award that we're seeing reported, will do little to turn things around in a profession that is in crisis. And as we had yesterday, Stephen Kinnock, the Health Minister, on the programme, and he was asked directly about this, wasn't he? And he was talking about how we needed to work within fiscal constraints, which therefore sounds like tough. Not good news for those workers.
Well, we're going to keep that health theme going. The front page of The Times is next. Milkshake tax looms in a broader sugar levy. So we all know about the sugar tax, been there for quite some time, but there's talk that it will be extended to milkshakes, lattes, other fizzy drinks, posh ones like San Pellegrino, Ribena, all of those favourites that by the way, a very low level in supermarkets for little people to be able to grab very easily. Well, this is actually being extended. It's a move that goes further than ministers actually expected, to be fair. And it's that sugar threshold. How much sugar is in one of those specially packaged milkshakes that kids all love, and you dish them out at maybe dinner time as a sweet treat. Keir Starmer saying, look, he doesn't care. He's going to double down on this nanny state accusation and go further, because we have, what do we have? NHS waiting lists, huge, obesity levels, crisis point, dental appointments. No one can actually get a dentist appointment because of, cavities for much younger kids than we've ever seen before. So
the difficulty is that obesity rates continue to rise despite the sugar tax. So many people say the sugar tax doesn't work.
And other initiatives, trying to get adverts cancelled. We could go on and on and on and on. What should we go to next, Mari? Front page of the Times.
Yes.
And this is all to do with, obviously,
Telegraph,
Yes, take it away.
So this is the power cuts that we've seen in Spain and Portugal. And what's really interesting, now this is very much speculation, so I want to, just inject a heavy dose of scepticism in this. But some energy experts are talking about whether infrastructure around renewable energy is perhaps not quite as robust as your traditional energy infrastructure, and whether that made Spain and Portugal weak to these blackouts. I haven't got time to go into the details of this, but it's really, really fascinating that people are even talking about this as a possibility.
OK, thank you, Mari. Thanks for your company. We'll be back after a short break with Wilfred.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. A big breaking story overnight. Mark Carney's Liberals win the Canadian election and he has strong words for Donald Trump.
Plus, Labour promised a new crackdown on migration as small boat crossings hit record levels. We'll speak to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, in the next few minutes.
And in the biggest fight in British boxing history, we'll hear from Alexander Usyk and Daniel Dubois ahead of their contest for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world.
It's Tuesday, the 29th of April. Your headlines. Mark Carney's Liberals ride to victory on a wave of Canadian fury at Donald Trump.
President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen.
I'm live in Ottawa, where Mark Carney has just delivered a victory speech and spoken of American betrayal and a hinge moment of history.
Also ahead, the government says that migrants convicted of sex crimes will be denied asylum. And cheers in Lisbon as the power's turned back on, but a warning that it could take days before the grid is fully restored after a massive blackout across Portugal and Spain. Good morning to you. Mark Carney's Liberal Party has won the Canadian election. It's a remarkable political comeback for the Liberals, who looked down and out a few months ago. They rode to victory on a wave of Canadian fury at President Trump, who spoke about making Canada the 51st US state. There are a lot of tight races, so numbers are constantly fluctuating, but here is what Canada's state broadcaster, CBC, is projecting as things stand. The Liberals are either leading or elected in 167 seats. The Conservatives are leading in 145. The separatist Bloc Québécois are on 23, and other parties are on 8, including the centre-left New Democrats. Mark Carney spoke in the last hour and had some firm words for Donald Trump.
These are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen. But we also must recognize the reality that our world has fundamentally changed. And now, more than ever, it is a time for ambition. It is a time to be bold, to meet this crisis with overwhelming positive force of a united Canada. Because we are going to build, baby, build.
Well, our correspondent James Matthews has been at Carney HQ in Ottawa all morning and joins us now with probably some loud music still going on behind him. It's been a good playlist, actually. I've been listening in the background, James, throughout the morning. First and foremost, we'll come to the numbers in a moment, but this is one of the great political comebacks for a major party in recent decades.
Yeah, in fact, by my reckoning, it's the biggest political comeback in modern democracy. Carney's Liberals were 25 points behind their Conservative opponents in January. Now, just 3 months on of Donald Trump, they have reversed that and they have won the election. The question right now is the extent of the victory. Will Carney scoop the majority that he wants, or will he have to settle for the awkwardness and the political challenges of a minority government? But to get to where they are tonight, the Liberals, once written off, have written political history. A stunning victory, and of course, it's all based around Donald Trump. This campaign of Mark Carney's, it was all about the threat of Donald Trump. He described it as an existential threat, and he fleshed that out. He took that campaign belligerence onto the stage with him when he delivered his victory speech, talking about how President Trump wants to break us so that he can own us. He spoke of American betrayal, a hinge moment of history. So clearly he is reinforcing a new muscular politics in Canada, a muscular politics in terms of dealing with Donald Trump.
James, we want to come back to you later because we want to get more details on this extraordinary breaking story. But we did get a great flavour there of the scale of victory, and we'll be back with James throughout the morning for longer chats. So we just need to tidy up the sound connection there a little bit. We're going to talk about what this all means here as well, and the main stories of the day here. Before, Mari, we get to the main story of the day here, this is a victory that will be celebrated in Downing Street.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, albeit not necessarily the hugest majority, I think there will be relief that there will be an ally across the Atlantic. And I think we know that Mark Carney, being, you know, the former governor of the Bank of England, has good connections here with the UK, a good relationship with the UK, and it was his first foreign trip as Prime Minister. And therefore, I think Keir Starmer will be pleased this morning that he's got someone he feels he can do business with.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see the first couple of meetings that Mark Carney has as a fully elected Prime Minister. Also going to be fascinating to see the final numbers as they come in overnight and exactly how he forms his government. Back out with James Matthews throughout the morning multiple times and a number of guests to come. Now, the government has announced plans to change the law to prevent people convicted of sex offences in the UK or abroad from claiming asylum. Mari, talk us through what we're expecting Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, to tell us when she joins us in about 10 minutes.
So the government is announcing that they are essentially kind of expanding the rules around the Refugee Convention in which there are certain exemptions. And so what they're saying is that if there is a foreign national who is here in the UK and they are on the sex offenders register, that they can be denied refugee status. So at the moment we have the Refugee Convention, and those exceptions are, for instance, war criminals, terrorists, those convicted of particularly serious crimes, so potentially could be anything above 12 months as your sentence. And they are adding those who are added to the sex offenders register onto that list. And what they say is that makes it easier for them to essentially stop allowing foreign criminals to stay here in the UK. They can therefore be sent back, deported, etc. Now, it all sounds great. However, it's really important to remember that actually they haven't given us any numbers, any data on this. So we have no idea how many people this really affects, how many people could therefore possibly be sent back, deported because of this change in the law. We don't have any data on this. They won't share any data with us. So it's quite difficult to see how impactful, if at all, this will be. Second of all, this is coming on the backdrop of a really quite uncomfortable set of figures that have been released. So the Home Office have released figures, and I think hopefully we can see it on the screen now, where you can see small boats crossings. So there we go. So 2021, it was 1,796 up to the 28th of April from the 1st of Jan, so the same period we're in now. Then 2022 rose to 5,352. Then 2023, 5,745. 2024, up again, 7,167. That was under the Tories. And now 2025, 9,885. So that is the highest ever on record since the records began. But also, at Sky News, we understand that that's actually now surpassed the 10,000 mark from the data that we have analysed. So even though it says just under 10,000, we actually understand it to be 10,000. And that is really politically painful at a time when the government said that there was the Tories that lost control of the borders and immigration. Keir Starmer said to our Beth Rigby yesterday on Sky News that it was the Tories that lost control of our borders. And the difficulty is, if you look at the numbers, the cold hard facts, it appears to be also now Labour losing control of borders. And so the rhetoric is that they're cracking down on sex offenders and foreign criminals, but the numbers don't lie. And unfortunately, that is a really difficult juxtaposition for the government this morning.
And we're going to talk to Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary. No better person to talk to about it all at 7:15, 5 or so minutes' time. Stay tuned for that. But let's get you up to speed on all the day's other stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. We'll take everyone to Spain now because the power grid has almost been completely restored after it was hit by a huge blackout. Well, actually, this was the scene in the Portuguese capital, Lisbon, as power started to be restored there. Relief for so many. Let's go live now to Sky's Ashna Huranag in Madrid. So it's been a nightmare for so many people. Just give us a sense of how people coped and where we're at. Morning, Ashna.
Good morning, all. Yeah, a medley of confusion and chaos, I think, describes it perfectly. The power only restored here in Madrid city centre only a matter of hours ago. When we landed last night, we were struggling for any kind of connectivity, as people may have seen. But this morning we woke up, there are full bars on our phones, and traffic lights and road signs are working as they should be, because yesterday it was a completely different picture. The infrastructure here had been all but decimated, complete blackout for both Spain and Portugal, the entire Iberian Peninsula, brought down by a power outage that happened in just 5 seconds. Some 60% of the country's national supply here in Spain went in just 5 seconds. Things like the traffic lights not working, the metro station being down, the train lines being down, meant that people had to get off their trains, walk the rest of their journeys, and simply were coming out of these office buildings and wandering the streets. They had no idea what was going on because, of course, they couldn't connect to the internet. It's the only time they heard about what was going on was when they finally got a bit of connectivity, managed to turn on the television, or managed to get some internet connection, speak to loved ones abroad who told them about their power outage. We even had people in Barcelona queuing up to get battery-operated radios. But look, the Spanish Prime Minister has said this was a connectivity collapse that he had never seen before. He said now 90% of the country's electricity has started to come back on. Portugal are still struggling. And as for the metro station, we're very near one right now, and some 80% of the lines are back up and running and should be running as normal. But look, when it comes to things like ATM machines, people getting their card readers charged back up again to start to sell and make purchases in shops and restaurants, that's still a bit of an issue this morning.
OK, Ashna, thank you, Ashna Hurinag there, with the very latest from Madrid. Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other news for you now. Belfast-based rap trio Kneecap have apologised to the families of murdered MPs Joe Cox and David Amess. They say they didn't intend to cause harm after a video from 2023 appeared to show a band member urging people to kill Tory MPs. The Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has called for prosecution. There are calls for the government to require all new homes to be built with solar panels. The local government association says the move could cut both household bills and meet climate change targets. Currently, 40% of new homes built have solar panels. And the sugar tax applied to fizzy drinks could now be extended to milkshakes under the proposals. The government is consulting on the proposals to end the exemption from the tax for dairy-based drinks, as well as non-dairy substitutes like oats and rice. The Treasury said young people only receive 3.5% of their calcium intake from such drinks.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks so much. As we said, the Home Secretary will be joining us shortly. Before we get to that, we just want to return to the top story of the morning, given that, of course, the sound connection there in the celebratory Liberal Party HQ was so loud we couldn't really hear from James Matthews. Just wanted to bring in a couple of comments that we heard from the two main leaders in the election campaign. First, the victor, Mark Carney.
These are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen. But we also must recognize the reality that our world has fundamentally changed. And now, more than ever, it is a time for ambition. It is a time to be bold, to meet this crisis with overwhelming positive force of a united Canada. Because we are going to build, baby, build.
Meanwhile, these were some of the comments from the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre.
While we will do our constitutional duty of holding government to account and proposing better alternatives, we will always put Canada first as we stare down tariffs and other irresponsible threats from President Trump. Conservatives will work with the Prime Minister and all parties with the common goal of defending Canada's interests and getting a new trade deal that puts these tariffs behind us while protecting our sovereignty and the Canadian people.
And as we mentioned, we're going to have much more reaction to that extraordinary comeback victory for the Liberal Party, for Mark Carney, a man, of course, who's well known here, former Bank of England governor, throughout the show. A number of guests joining us. By the way, we're also going to be joined in the 9 o'clock hour by Ed Conway, our very own data and economics editor, who knows him well from having probably sat in more press conferences given by Mark Carney than maybe many Canadian journalists have, frankly, come to think of it. So we'll talk about what that election victory for Mark Carney means for the UK with Ed Conway later in the show. And, of course, continue to bring you up to speed on all of the results as they come in, as we get to see exactly how many seats he has in the Canadian Parliament. Now, US President Donald Trump is set to ease tariffs on imported car parts today in a concession to American car makers to mark his 100 days in office. Trump sent shockwaves through the global economy in April when he announced huge import tariffs on countries around the world. Sky's Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch has been to Vietnam to see how they're being affected there.
On the Saigon River, you can see and feel Vietnam's miracle growth story. But it's one of the most trade-dependent countries in the world.
Today, about 30% of Vietnam's exports go to the United States. Last year, it accounted for about 30% of its gross domestic product. But Vietnam imports very little from America, creating the kind of trade deficit Trump really doesn't like. Ultimately, if he decides to impose anything like 46% tariffs here, it could be very damaging to the economy.
The government moved fast to try and cut a deal, offering 0% tariffs on US goods. But that was seen as pretty cosmetic. America wants Vietnam to show some muscle.
If you're Vietnam going into these trade talks with America, what would you be offering?
To buy American products. If Vietnam goes in the trade talks saying that we will be a reliable manufacturer of the core products that you need and a reliable buyer of the core products that America wants to sell, I think the outcome could be good.
And do you think they'll achieve that balance?
I hope so. The question is, how much does China also have the ear of the Vietnamese negotiators?
Cutting Big Brother loose isn't an option. China has a massive footprint here. But Donald Trump wants a major gear change. He claims China's using its neighbour to sell products illegally, shipping them stateside with Made in Vietnam labels. That claim is hard to assess. But down by the river, they question the logic and likelihood of America stepping in to do what they've spent years finessing.
The United States GDP is so high. It's the largest in the world right now. What's the point of trying to get the jobs from developing countries like Vietnam and other Asian nations? It's unnecessary. It makes America look weaker to me than it used to be.
The US relies on Vietnam for clothing, but on the factory floors of Ho Chi Minh City, the whole fabric of their industry could change.
One of the things this factory produces is cheerleading outfits for export to America. Now, even though the tariffs are currently on pause, they're already feeling the effects here. They're working overtime, trying to press through with orders before the deadline.
Thankfully, this factory started diversifying years ago, expanding exports to Russia and the Middle East.
In 2021, we have more than 40% of export revenue to US. But we see that very dangerous if we depend on one or two markets. So we have to lose our profit. We have to spend more money for marketing to find another market.
That will probably protect them. Others are far more exposed. It's a nation caught between two warring sides, flashing the emergency lights. A warning, a test, but an opportunity too. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam.
Cordelia Lynch there for us from Vietnam, and we're going to talk more about Trump's 100 days in office throughout the morning. But time now to speak to the government. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. A very good morning to you, Home Secretary. Thanks for joining us. We were just reflecting a little bit before we came to you, but the big story of the day, of course, is this extraordinary comeback victory for the Liberal Party and Mark Carney. He presumably is a good friend of the UK and someone you'd welcome in a leadership position in Canada.
Well, he's obviously very well known to people across the UK government, across the UK, as a result of his previous role at the Bank of England. But we also, our relationship with Canada is extremely important, a very close one, both around security, cooperation, trade, on so many other areas. So, of course, we look forward to working with the new Canadian government.
And you, perhaps, Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, know him personally?
Certainly, and Rachel Reeves has worked with him for over a long period of time and had many discussions with him as well.
Let's move on to what you're announcing today, which is to try and prevent foreign nationals who commit sex offences from claiming asylum here.
Yeah. So at the moment, people can end up still claiming asylum even when they have committed significant sex offences. And we had the case some years ago about Abdullah Zedi, who last year committed the most appalling crime that people will remember in Clapham, the acid attack that people will remember. And yet he had been granted asylum in 2020 by the courts, even though he had been put on the sex offender register for 10 years. I just think that's wrong. I think it's a disgrace that he was granted asylum in that case, and that's why we're now changing the law. So if someone is put on the sex offenders register, if they have committed a sex offence in that way, actually they should not be able to be granted asylum in this country.
So there's a couple of areas I'm just keen to clarify. The first is perhaps a simple one, which is this is for sexual offences they might have committed once they have arrived in this country. If they'd been convicted of something in their original country, that's not relevant.
That can also apply. That can also be taken into account.
That can also apply. And so you'd recognise a foreign country's conviction in that regard?
We can also take that into account as part of the asylum system.
The other question that everyone is raising on this is the difference between what the courts can still interpret. You're obviously passing new legislation here. Will that supersede things like the Human Rights Act and the European Convention on Human Rights?
Well, we continue to comply with international law, but the whole point is that our laws and our frameworks are about how we interpret international law, how we interpret whether it be different parts of international law, and how we make sure that the courts are then making their decisions based on the UK law that Parliament has passed. So this is about a system we've had in place for some time, a rule which says if someone has committed a particularly serious crime where the sentence is more than 12 months, then they can be denied asylum in the UK. I don't think that goes far enough. I really don't think that goes far enough. And that's why we're adding sex offences to the law as part of the border security bill that is passing through Parliament at the moment, which also strengthens counter-terror powers, for example, for going after criminal smuggler gangs.
So I did want to just focus in on this then as it regards to the ECHR, because there was a case reported in February where a Zimbabwean paedophile was allowed to stay in Britain because a judge ruled it would breach his human rights under Article 3 of the ECHR because an openly gay man who'd been jailed for more than 5 years for child sexual offences, he was likely to face substantial hostility from the Zimbabwean authorities if he was sent back to Zimbabwe. Clearly, he was already convicted for a 5-year term sentence, so it's already above the 12 months in law today. So that's what I just want to clarify. The change you're making today, based on this example, wouldn't alter because the ECHR and Article 3 of it would still overrule the legislation you're passing?
So the first stage is to ensure that someone doesn't get the additional asylum protection. That means additional status and length of time that they're allowed to stay in the UK. So the first stage is to ensure that that is prevented. Then the issue is we then seek to deport people. There can be further obstacles to deportations, including in the courts, including also practical obstacles in terms of being able to get the returns agreements and arrangements in place as well. So there can be further obstacles, but we seek to challenge those obstacles, and we have already increased our returns. We've increased returns, for example, of foreign national offenders by more than 20% since the election as a result of the work that we're taking. So, of course, there will continue to be obstacles. But the point that we're doing is step by step, we're tackling and challenging some of these issues in order to make sure that the asylum system itself has rules that can be properly implemented and enforced and respected.
No, and lots of good steps and measures there. I don't know, and forgive me if I'm wrong on this, if that answered my question, though. Specifically, Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights would still apply.
We continue to abide by international law. And so we do think you have to abide by international law because, to be honest, if we don't abide by international law, and that includes on the Convention on Human Rights, then it's much harder to get things like returns agreements and so on in place. So we do continue to respect that, including issues around torture, issues around other serious issues in the international law. But one of the areas where we are looking at the way in which international law is being interpreted in the United Kingdom is around issues around family life, where we've had a series of decisions that have been made in the courts. People refer to it sometimes as being about Article 8 and being referred to in the courts. We are reviewing that because we do believe that the way in which it's being interpreted in the courts is an issue, and actually there is greater clarification we can provide through our law to address that.
But this example is not about family life. And just to come back to...
I think that was about torture-related, or the Article 3, I think you were referring
but
to.
it was about someone who's a convicted paedophile, but because they were also openly gay, they weren't sent back to Zimbabwe, where they thought the courts felt, under the interpretation of Article 3 of ECHR, that they'd face substantial hostility from Zimbabwe authorities. I just want to come back to the overarching point, which is, in your press release today, in your first answer, or second answer today, which was to say that you don't think it's right for people who've committed sexual offences to stay here. If there is then a law or a way that British judges interpret international law that prevents you enforcing that, is that OK? Because this example, and I haven't heard you say your new legislation would overrule this, this example would happen again under your new legislation.
So we've had a series of cases, including the Azedi case that I referred to, that have been happening year after year after year. That is why we're changing the law. And what this does...
But would the law change prevent this example?
What it does do is it prevents cases, any cases like this, from getting asylum protection. Asylum protection, the refugee status, that can last for many years. That can give people additional status in the UK to be able to live their lives in the UK. There are other cases where people have been denied refugee status, they've been denied that asylum protection, where we still have to then work very hard through different legal routes, through different kinds of diplomatic routes, in order to get people returned or to get them removed from the country. Of course, there are still obstacles, but the point about the approach that we're taking is, we've heard, I think, from the previous government, all you got was rhetoric. All you got was a sort of just claim, let's blame everybody else, let's make these grand claims. We're taking a different approach. It's a hard graft approach, which says step by step we'll look at the ways in which we can change the law, the ways in which we can increase returns, the way in which step by step we can start to actually make the system more effective, fairer, and also have these rules being respected and enforced.
I guess my final point on this, though, is this man, unless you tell me otherwise, would still be here. So what would you say to someone that's saying, you too, all we're getting is rhetoric?
Well, we're changing the law, which would apply, for example, in the Azedi case. That was during a period where it would have been possible to return him to his home country, and therefore we are taking action in cases like that, because there are cases that I have seen where countries, including countries where we have returns arrangements with, where it is possible to return them, but currently they are not, we are not able to do so because they're being granted asylum. So we know that there are cases going through the system where it should be possible to return people, and currently we are not able to, who are getting asylum granted in this country even though they have committed sexual offences. I think that is wrong, and that is why we're changing the law.
OK, but it sounds like there will still be some examples where, even though it's wrong, the government still won't be able to prevent the ECHR.
We'll continue to pursue cases through the courts, as we do.
Very quick final question, because we're out of time. The power outage in Spain and Portugal, has that sent a shiver down your spine? Is there a fear that our infrastructure could be hit in some way, shape or form in a similar way?
We do have a continued approach to resilience, making sure that we have a resilience and also security issues. We've been looking as part of wider security reviews across the country at how we deal with both resilience and also different kinds of challenges and threats, some of which can be the traditional security challenges, some of which can be the kinds of resilience things that we're talking about in Spain and Portugal, and we obviously support them and the governments there in the work that they're doing.
Home Secretary, great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank
The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. We're going to take a very quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, we'll have more reaction to the Canadian election result.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up in just a moment, we'll have more on Mark Carney's astonishing political comeback for his party, the Liberal Party. That's coming up in just a moment. But first, a reminder of all of the day's top stories.
Thanks, Wilfred. Canada's Liberal Party leader, Mark Carney, has declared victory in the country's elections. His party enjoyed a swell of support in the wake of repeated comments by US President Donald Trump that he wanted Canada to become the 51st US state.
President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen. But we also must recognize the reality that our world has fundamentally changed.
People convicted of sexual offences will be blocked from claiming asylum in the UK. These are under plans aimed at tightening border security. The Refugee Convention allows countries to refuse asylum to people who have committed a particularly serious crime. And ministers want to update UK law so the definition includes sex offenders. And power has started returning to parts of Spain and Portugal following a huge outage which brought hospitals and public transport to a standstill. A national emergency had been declared in Spain with 30,000 police deployed to maintain order.
Leah, great stuff. Thanks so much. Let's get more on our top story. We've just heard, in fact, from the Prime Minister here, Sir Keir Starmer, on his views towards that election result. He says, I welcome your leadership on international issues and I know we will continue to work closely on defence, security, trade and investment. Of course, that is Sir Keir Starmer's words towards Mark Carney, the victor of the Canadian election overnight. Well, our correspondent James Matthews was at Mark Carney's victory speech and sent this report.
He styled himself the man to take on Trump. Canadians took him at his word. Mark Carney, the duly elected Prime Minister of Canada, addressed a victory rally overnight.
And my message to every Canadian is this. No matter where you live, no matter what language you speak, no matter how you voted, I will always do my best to represent everyone who calls Canada home. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen. When I sit down with President Trump, it will be to discuss the future economic and security relationship between two sovereign nations.
Let's choose to be united and strong.
Carney has led an astonishing political comeback. His Liberal Party was dead and buried as an electoral force last January. What turned Canadians was the election before theirs, and the US president who imposed tariffs and threatened to annex Canada as the 51st state. In the UK, Mark Carney is the familiar face, with crisis management on his CV. He was the Bank of England governor through Brexit, having led the Bank of Canada through the 2008 crash. Across Canada, a central issue was who was best placed to deal with Donald Trump. Polls reflected a public trust in the finance man shaping for a fight.
That contest is not decided between Carney and Trump, it's decided internally in America. But if Canada can be strong and put up resistance, then I think, governors and the Senate and even the House and the markets will all have a say in it.
He is the political rookie who's led the biggest comeback in modern democracy. Carney's Liberals, once written off, have written history. He styled himself as the man best placed to tackle the nemesis next door. It's the biggest job in his intrigue.
When I went to vote with my two kids who are 10 and 8, they were wondering how am I choosing their future with Trump in mind.
Respect is what he's going to get from a lot of other countries as well as our own people.
Now we have a strong majority government and we have a strong position to negotiate.
Winning this election was a political challenge that mattered to Mark Carney. To Canada, the next one matters more. James Matthews, Sky News, in Ottawa.
James Matthews there for us, and more to come on the Canadian election result later on in the show. For now, let's pivot to one of our other top stories of the day, that extraordinary power outage in Spain and Portugal. Let's bring in Barcelona resident Maha Cusbury, who's been affected by the outage, joins us now. Maha, thanks so much for joining us. Where were you, and talk us through the moment when the power suddenly went out?
I was working from home, and suddenly around 12:30, the lights started flickering and it just went out. Everything went out, the lights, the power, internet, phone signal, there was nothing. So after waiting for a while, I just left the house and found out that everybody was in the same situation, because I just had no way of figuring out what was going on.
And presumably your power is back now. How long did it take to come back on?
Yeah, strangely enough, some neighborhoods started getting power back around 4:30, and then It's very strange because some buildings would have power, other buildings in the same street even would not get the power back for some hours after. In my residence, I got it back around 10.
And what explanation have you been given so far as a nation? Do you know what happened?
Well, what's been in the news? The Prime Minister said that they lost a huge amount of power, 15 gigawatts or something like that. And they did not say why or what caused this, so I still don't know.
Who do you blame?
Well, I honestly don't blame anybody because I don't know. There's just not enough information. But I've never seen anything like this. It's just the fact. I think they should have been better prepared for a blackout because the signal, like the phones didn't have any signal, and perhaps there should have been some backup so people could at least keep in touch. I was running into. I have some relatives that live close to me. I ran into them by coincidence because they were also looking for me. We had no way to reach out to each other. We would just to be able to ring their doorbell. We needed electricity, so I couldn't even know if they were home or not.
Mahad, thank you so much for joining us and giving us that perspective from Barcelona. Let's explore a little bit more the possible explanations of what happened with Professor of Aerospace and Engineering Sinead O'Sullivan. One explanation, Sinead, is this issue about some kind of atmospheric pressure drop-off. Talk us through that explanation.
Yeah, no, this is an incredibly rare atmospheric phenomenon. It's called the induced atmospheric vibrations, which is just as weird as it sounds. So basically, this potentially could be down to very, very large and extreme temperature differences within layers of the atmosphere. So we're not talking about, people kind of said, well, it couldn't be that because it's not even that hot in Madrid. We're not talking about the difference in temperature between Madrid and Lisbon. We're talking about the difference in temperature between 1 kilometre up to 8 kilometres in the atmosphere, where these massive high voltage power lines tend to move energy from one country to another. So if you have at 1,000 kilometres 5 degrees, and then at 2,000 kilometres minus 15 degrees, that 20 degree, and they think it could have been around 20 to 25 degrees difference, is massive because usually you only get 6 to 7 degrees of difference. So that difference in temperature creates very volatile air that would have physically moved and created oscillations in these power lines. Now, the grid is extremely sensitive, so anything that goes physically out of synchronization is going to cause big issues.
Sorry, this might be a really stupid question, but there are power lines. These are power lines that are much lower to the ground, but the pressure difference is much higher?
Some of these power lines can be very high up in the air. So not only, when I say 1,000 to 2,000 meters, that doesn't necessarily have to be, that could be above sea level. Right. Now, for example, if you imagine these power lines, I don't know if you've seen them before, they're really tall. And so even the ability to move with wind or other conditions at that height is actually massive. It's not like being on the ground. These things are actually very high up.
And so I guess the question then, as we heard from the previous guest, he didn't feel it was right to blame anyone. Mm-hmm. But is this something that could have been predicted, or at least the need for these power lines to be more resilient is a legitimate question for voters to ask in the years ahead?
I think so, because, again, it's a very rare phenomenon. Yet we did actually see something in Spain, Portugal, France around 2003. They think it was something very similar. Now, the issue here, potentially what we may see unfolding, is not so much that the circuit breakers didn't work properly in this instance. I think they did. But I think what we might be talking about today is that the fact that the backup grid energy was moved nearly entirely to renewables, which are themselves a very, very unstable form of energy. So there is this kind of question around, if we are moving towards a world of fully renewable and sustainable energy, how do we modulate massive power grid systems across Europe? We are, of course, living in an era of unprecedented climate volatility. So even turbulence in an aircraft is now an issue where it didn't used to be. Again, because of the massive movement of air in the atmosphere because of massive temperature differences. So there are questions now that may not have been asked before that are going to start to become more important.
Really fascinating. And final question, I mean, what similarities to what's happened, although we're still learning in the last 24 hours, in Spain and Portugal apply to our power grid and our situation here? Is it highly unlikely anything similar would happen?
Yeah, well, firstly, you know, our power grid here is not interconnected across as large of an area as, you know, Spain, Portugal, France, and continental Europe. We have a very different type of electricity generation here. Our backups are very different. It's highly unlikely that we would see something like this in the UK.
Sinead, great stuff as always. Thanks so much for coming in. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show this morning, we're going to be talking more about the Canadian election results.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna.
We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear-gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us.
I remember going into the iconic Durman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here.
My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
They call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
The Yazidis are a very small religious group, and in 2014, ISIS seemed to have set about their destruction.
Chilling reports describe ISIL militants rounding up families, conducting mass executions, and enslaving Yazidi women.
Some Yazidi survivors refused to be beaten by ISIS, but the suffering of the Yazidis is far from over. 10 years of darkness on Sky News.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Welcome back. Let's return to our top story. Canada's Liberal Party leader, Mark Carney, has declared victory in the country's election. Let's bring in now Nick Nanos, one of the highest regarded pollsters in Canada. Nick, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us. Sum up for us the scale of surprise at this election result if we'd been having this conversation 2-3 months ago.
Well, what we have is a blockbuster election in Canada. You know, back at the end of December, the Justin Trudeau Liberal government was quite unpopular. It had dropped in support in the polls to 20%, with the Conservatives at 47%. So the Conservatives, led by Pierre Poilievre, had a 27-point advantage at the end of December. Fast forward, Justin Trudeau's resignation, Donald Trump's attack on Canada in terms of tariffs, and the election of Mark Carney as the leader. And tonight, what we've seen is the Liberals basically rise from their deathbed and form a government. You know, the thing is right now, they're still counting the ballots, but Mark Carney and the Liberals are only 5 seats away from forming a majority government, and he has about 43 to 44% support. So it's quite dramatic in terms of what's happened in the last number of months.
Well, I mean, let's just expand on that for me a step more. Is it the most extraordinary political turnaround for a major party you've seen in recent decades?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the other ironic twist is that, you know, the thing is there's been a consolidation of support around the two main parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives. And, you know, in Canada, we have the Bloc Québécois, which is a separatist Quebec party, which is a francophone. We also have the New Democrats, which are a social democratic party. All those other parties got squeezed because what happened was we had a campaign where one of the primary focuses was Donald Trump and the response to tariffs. And that particular lens basically coalesced voters around the two main choices who are very different. On the one hand, the Conservatives were very populist. On the other hand, we had the Liberals, led by Mark Carney, who are a little more centrist.
One of the other sort of takeaways, I think, from the last few years of elections has been that the incumbent has been hit very hard, whether that incumbent party was centre-left, centre-right, or something different, because of inflation, because of tepid growth and other factors. The incumbent has taken a pounding. Do you think this is a moment that suggests that moment is behind us across a number of countries, perhaps? Or is this a country-specific rejection of that recent theme?
Actually, I don't think that's behind us, because the fact of the matter is for the Conservatives and for the voters who are supporting the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre, they wanted change. They're worried about paying for the groceries, worried about paying for the rent and the mortgage. And, you know, those sentiments still exist and are very strong. However, I think here's a lesson, I think, for many Western democracies, especially for right-wing parties, is that Pierre Poilievre was seen as being a populist. He talked about Canada first, which is very reminiscent of the America first, and sounded very much like Donald Trump. I think maybe the one thing that we've learned is that populist-style politics that sounds like Donald Trump in a world where he is taking on his allies is bad politics. You know, because what's happening is that Donald Trump has now become a rallying point within countries outside of the United States from a political perspective.
It's so interesting hearing you echo Canada first as the kind of tagline for the defeated Conservative leader. Obviously, Mark Carney's tagline, Canada strong, isn't drastically different, but is it very cleverly different? And also break down for us how different an approach it was to his predecessor of the Liberal Party leader, Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, actually, you know, the thing is for the Conservatives, they probably had the right message, but the wrong tone. He just sounded too much like Donald Trump, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party. And I think for a lot of voters, that was what people turned off. The other thing that's really important to realize is that in the polling, when we asked Canadians who they would prefer as Prime Minister, Mark Carney led by double digits throughout the whole campaign, which means that the Liberal win this evening was not about the Liberals. It was not about the last 10 years. It was not about embracing liberal values. It was about a rejection of populist-style politics, but also an embrace of Mark Carney as the person that people thought would be best able to deal with Donald Trump. And, you know, the other thing is that it's very clear, and one of the reasons why the Liberals were on the political ropes under Justin Trudeau is that he had a very progressive agenda. He did not focus as much on jobs in the economy, and I think people were just fed up and they were ready for change. And along comes Mark Carney, and, you know, let's face it, if you look at Mark Carney's biography as the former governor of the Bank of Canada, the former governor of the Bank of England, the former Goldman Sachs partner, the reality is that he looks very much like a conservative. He talks like a conservative. He's much more moderate in terms of his politics compared to the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and people were ready for a change.
Just finally, on economic policy areas, is he going to be very different to Trudeau? And what does it mean for other trading partners like the United Kingdom. Do you think free trade deals with the UK, for example, are something that will be high on his priority list or not?
You know, what's interesting is that he did release his costed platform, and it was a big spending platform with a significant deficit, which is not a departure from the previous government. I think for a lot of watchers, they were surprised at the amount of spending that was proposed in the Liberal platform. On the trade front, what's interesting is that when we poll Canadians and ask about trade, there's a significant appetite to diversify our kind of trade opportunities with Europe, the United Kingdom, even China. Perceptions related to China have improved over the last 2 months as views of the United States have soured. So right now, Canada is in a place where there is an appetite to reach out to other countries in order to build stronger trading relationships. And, we know from our polling that the United Kingdom is very well regarded by Canadians, and they see the United Kingdom as a natural partner, natural security partner, a natural ally, but also a natural trading partner.
Absolutely fascinating, Nick. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and no doubt a busy night for you, but perhaps a slightly less busy month or so ahead. Nick Nanos there from Canada. Let's have a quick look at the weather before we leave you this hour.
The perfect climate, wherever the destination. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It'll be mostly dry with plenty of sunshine this week and will turn very warm. Temperatures look like peaking on Thursday at 29 Celsius, 84 Fahrenheit. It's mainly dry and sunny now, but northern Scotland is quite cloudy, while the Northern Isles are dull and damp. There are a few fog patches elsewhere. It'll stay mostly dry and sunny this morning, with the cloud over Scotland breaking away from the far north. Expect further drizzly outbreaks there. It'll be mostly very warm, although cooler under the cloud over northern Scotland and where sea breezes develop around the coast. That's
the perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Do stay with us here on Sky News Breakfast. Lots to get to, including more on the Canadian election, but also more on this announcement from the Home Office, which we haven't had a chance to dissect yet.
Yeah, absolutely. They're talking about trying to stop convicted sex offenders being able to have refugee status.
And Canadian election results, a big surprise.
Yeah, big
compared
surprise.
to a couple months ago.
Absolutely, a huge turnaround for Mark Carney.
All the day's top stories in just a couple minutes. Don't go.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Good morning to you. It's 8 o'clock. Mark Carney declares victory for his Liberal Party in the Canadian election and issues harsh words for Donald Trump.
Plus, Labour promises a new crackdown on migration as small boat crossings hit record levels. We'll ask the Conservatives if the measures are tough enough.
And as Donald Trump marks 100 days in office, we'll debate what's been achieved and cross over live to Vietnam to see the impact of his tariffs.
It's Tuesday, the 29th of April. Your headlines. Mark Carney's Liberals ride to victory on a wave of Canadian fury at Donald Trump.
President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen.
Also ahead, the government says the migrants convicted of sex crimes will be denied asylum. Cheers in Lisbon as the power is turned back on, but a warning that it could take days before the grid is fully restored after a massive blackout across Portugal and Spain. A very good morning to you. Mark Carney's Liberal Party has won the Canadian election. After securing victory, Carney issued a warning to Donald Trump. He told crowds that the US president is trying to break us so that America can own us, and that will never happen. Well, in a moment, we'll get more live from Ottawa. But first, James Matthews was there at Carney's victory speech and sent us this report.
He styled himself the man to take on Trump. Canadians took him at his word. Mark Carney, the duly elected Prime Minister of Canada, addressed a victory rally overnight.
And my message to every Canadian is this: no matter where you live, no matter what language you speak, no matter how you voted, I will always do my best to represent everyone who calls Canada home. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen. When I sit down with President Trump, it will be to discuss the future economic and security relationship between two sovereign nations.
Carney has led an astonishing political comeback. His Liberal Party was dead and buried as an electoral force last January. What turned Canadians was the election before theirs, and the US president who imposed tariffs and threatened to annex Canada as the 51st state. In the UK, Mark Carney is the familiar face, with crisis management on his CV. He was the Bank of England governor through Brexit, having led the Bank of Canada through the 2008 crash. Across Canada, a central issue was who was best placed to deal with Donald Trump. Polls reflected a public trust in the finance man shaping for a fight.
That contest is not decided between Carney and Trump, it's decided internally in America. But if Canada can be strong and put up resistance, then I think, governors and the Senate and even the House and the markets will all have a say in it.
He is the political rookie who's led the biggest comeback in modern democracy. Carney's Liberals, once written off, have written history. He styled himself as the man best placed to tackle the nemesis next door. It's the biggest job in his intrigue.
When I went to vote with my two kids who are 10 and 8, they were wondering how am I choosing their future with Trump in mind.
Now we have a strong majority government and we have a strong position to negotiate.
Respect is what he's going to get from a lot of other countries as well as our own people.
Winning this election was a political challenge that mattered to Mark Carney. To Canada, the next one matters more. James Matthews, Sky News, in Ottawa.
Let's bring in Nick Nanos, one of the most respected pollsters in Canada, able to join us once again. Nick, thanks for sticking around. Just give us a snapshot, the scale of political comeback this is for the Liberal Party compared to where they stood in the polls a few months ago.
Well, the Liberal Party was realistically on the ropes. They were down to 20% support nationally. The Conservatives were at 47. And, the seat projections at that time that we do suggested that the Conservatives would have formed a supermajority in the House of Commons. Canadians were gripped with the fever for change. They wanted Justin Trudeau out. They wanted the Liberals out of power. They wanted to punish the Liberals for the last 10 years. And it went from a mood of anger, change, and punishment to worry and concern about Donald Trump, not thinking about the past, but actually thinking about the future and who might be best positioned to manage the bilateral relationship between Canada and the United States. And you know what? There were people that voted Liberal that probably had convinced themselves back in December that they will never vote Liberal, that they're very angry at the Liberals for the last 10 years. But faced with the specter of Donald Trump threatening and instituting tariffs on Canada, and faced with the stress in the binational relationship, all that stuff basically was thrown out the window as Canadians focused on who might be best to move forward in this new world where Donald Trump is a disruptor in chief.
And Nick, talk to me about how significant it was that Justin Trudeau decided to step down as leader of his party, and Mark Carney obviously replacing him, versus how significant it was that Donald Trump presented this new obvious opposition to both candidates in this election. Could Trudeau have won if he'd held on in the face of the attacks on Canada that Trump offered in the months that followed?
Not to be too verbose, but no, I don't think he could have won under any circumstance. The reality is that he had become a political lightning rod. He had been too focused on kind of progressive issues and an agenda that really wasn't in sync with the populace that was worried about paying for the bills and about jobs, growth, and the economy. So I don't think he would have. I don't think he could have defeated the Conservatives or held on to power. The other thing I think that's quite important to realize is that I'm not convinced, and we polled throughout the election every night, I'm not convinced that Mark Carney could have defeated or won the election unless it was for the Trump factor. That was a coalescing factor for many voters. It was basically a game changer in terms of what the ballot question was that people were thinking about going in on voting day today. And, I think, Mark, luck counts in life. I think Mark Carney ended up being lucky because when he pursued the leadership, there was no sense that the Liberals would be able to win the next election. But, the thing is that Trudeau stepping down, Trump kind of being the top ballot issue that Canadians were fixated on, and then a campaign where we have to remember he had the benefit of being prime minister and also the leader of the Liberal Party, and there's I'm sure it's the same convention in the United Kingdom. There's a caretaker convention that usually whoever happens to be the prime minister does not take advantage of their position during the course of the campaign. Well, that was basically set aside in the Canadian election, because the reality is that when Donald Trump was slapping tariffs on Canadian goods like aluminum and the auto sector, the prime minister at that time, Mark Carney, had to respond. So he had the benefit of not just being the leader of the Liberal Party, he had the benefit of being able to respond as prime minister and look prime ministerial and assertive with Donald Trump.
And Nick, just finally, it's a fascinating final thought, this, which is that on one level, a lot of people here are wondering, should Keir Starmer take a more combative approach towards Donald Trump? Would that help him in the polls in the way that clearly it did Mark Carney? On another level, you said something to us last hour that suggested Pierre Poilievre was too Trump-like, and that hurt him as polls were taken over the course of yesterday. Where's the balance there?
Well, not to quote a famous British politician, but can I tell you, appeasement does not work. Canadians are friends with the United States. They're our most important trading partner. They're our most important ally. But, the thing is when we do polling now, under Donald Trump, Canadians support a more strident retaliation to what he's doing, because they know that if not, we will just get steamrolled by Donald Trump. That said, Canadians at the same time understand that our economy will suffer. We will suffer if we enter into a trade war with the United States. So although we're prepared to escalate, we prefer not to escalate because what we want to see is a certain level of stability. But I think if anyone thinks that by dealing with Donald Trump, that you can appease him or kind of ameliorate what's happening, if you can take it from a Canadian, I think you're a little misguided. I think Trump respects forcefulness and confidence, and I think that's the best path forward. At the same time, Canadians don't want to see an escalation, and I think Mark Carney, at least so far, has been able to strike the right balance of being firm but not escalating the tensions between Canada and the United States.
Nick, great stuff. Thanks so much for joining us live in Ottawa this morning. Mari's here with some of the reaction of what this all means for the UK. And there's a further big difference here, which is that Keir Starmer's not about to face, well, he's about to face local elections, but he's not about to face another general election. So it alters, again, the tactics you employ in the short term in responding to Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, there'll be a little bit of relief this morning in Downing Street that someone who's a little bit more kind of like-minded has been elected in Canada. I'm going to read you what the Prime Minister's put out a statement this morning. He says, "Congratulations to Mark Carney on your electoral victory. The UK and Canada are the closest of allies, partners and friends. With your leadership and personal ties to the UK, I know the relationship between our two countries will continue to grow." He goes on to say our partnership is based on shared history, values, with shared sovereign, and I look forward to strengthening our ties following our successful meeting in Downing Street. He carries on talking and he basically says he's looking forward to the G7 meeting in Canada later this year in the summertime as well. And what's really interesting is, just for a bit of fun, the Liberal Democrats, arguably the sister party, they've released a statement congratulating the Liberals, but their statement ends by saying voters in England have the chance to send a similar message on Thursday by electing Liberal Democrat local campaigners. And they're turning it straight back onto the local elections. So, you know, congrats to Canada, but it's really all about us.
It's a similar party or not, that debate could go on for ages. It's just the word liberal is used much more in America and Canada than Labour. But very interesting, nonetheless, to hear that reaction. And then talk to us, Mari, about what the government were announcing today, and I guess kind of the truthfulness or the depth of it and whether it will be really effective or not.
So the government is announcing that it is going to stop those who've been convicted of sex offences here in the UK of getting refugee status. They argue it will make it harder for potentially them to stay, might make it easier for them to be returned or deported. However, it's not that simple. Lots of the claims that we've seen upheld in the courts, people use things like the European Convention of Human Rights, the Human Rights Act instead to stay in the UK. So it sounds great, but there aren't really any figures attached to it, so we don't really know how effective it might be.
All right, great stuff. As always, thanks so much for that. Right, let's get you up to speed on all the day's other stories now. Leah's got that for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. In Spain and Portugal, things seem to be getting back to normal. This is after yesterday's massive power outage. Let's go live now to Sky's Ashna Huranag in Madrid. I was looking at pictures of yesterday, pictures from a metro where it was pitch black, trains stopping mid-journey. It was absolute chaos, wasn't it, Ashna?
It was. That word, unprecedented, is often overused, isn't it? But it's simply the only word that we can use to describe the situation. It's why, in the last 10 minutes or so, a national security meeting has just been called, chaired by the King of Spain, King Felipe, alongside the Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, here in Spain. They're going to be discussing the people that are still without power, because whilst largely the lights have flickered on for some people, crucially not for everyone. We know that yesterday they deployed some 30,000 police, but also troops too, as this entire country, alongside Portugal, was brought to a standstill. We describe these scenes as blackouts. It really was a blackout in places like the plazas, the piazzas. People were out and about for restaurants, but food wasn't able to be heated up. People weren't able to take out cash from ATM machines, and contactless card readers had stopped working, so vendors had to close early. But crucially, people didn't even know what was going on. People were inside their flats, not getting any connectivity on their internet, not able to switch on things like their lights in their rooms, their television screens. But it was only when they started to get a little bit of signal did they start to get told by other people abroad what was going on in their own country, finding out that there had been this mass power outage, not only in this region, but in the entirety of Spain and the larger Iberian Peninsula. We found out yesterday that 15 gigawatts, that's some 60% of the national supply, the Spanish Prime Minister said, disappeared, went like that in just 5 seconds. We understand that over 90% of the country's power supply is now back, and the same can be said for Portugal too. But meanwhile, the focus now turns to the cause of this, not only helping the people, of course, who are still cut off. There are some people down in the southern Spain who are being assisted by power generators from Morocco, for instance, but there are crucially thousands of people still stuck in those airports. We learnt yesterday, we were only able to land yesterday because of those backup generators powering places like Madrid and Lisbon Airport. But crucially, as I say, what the cause of this is, we're yet to find out.
Ashna, thank you. Ashna Hurinag there with the latest from a sunny Madrid. OK, let's take a look at some of today's other news for you. Belfast-based rap trio Kneecap have apologised to the families of murdered MPs Joe Cox and David Amess. They say they didn't intend to cause harm after a video from 2023 appeared to show a band member urging people to kill Tory MPs. The Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has called for them to be prosecuted. There are calls for the government to require all new homes to be built with solar panels. The Local Government Association says the move could cut both household bills and meet climate change targets. Currently, 40% of new homes built have solar panels. And the sugar tax applied to fizzy drinks could be now extended to milkshakes. The government is consulting on proposals to end the exemption from the tax for dairy-based drinks, as well as non-dairy substitutes like oat and rice. The Treasury said young people only receive 3.5% of their calcium intake from drinks like you're seeing on screen.
Yeah. Great stuff, thank you. Now, the Duke and Duchess of Rothesay are, as they are known in Scotland, that's William and Kate, are visiting the Isle of Mull today on what's also their 14th anniversary. Let's speak to our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock. Laura, I guess the senior royals are showing in recent weeks and months that they'll keep working even on their anniversaries. The King and Queen obviously doing the same recently. Talk us through what's on the agenda today.
Well, this really is a picture postcard setting awaiting William and Kate, or the Duke and Duchess of Rothesay, as they're known in Scotland. They're coming to Mull, arriving here in Tobermory, to learn more about rural island life. And this, I think, is a significant moment for them. Ever since Kate's cancer diagnosis and subsequent treatment, we have rarely seen them out and about together. So this two-day overnight visit does feel, I think, a bit of a return to the old routine. And after a year that really has been anything but routine. And for Kate, this feels like a significant milestone in her recovery. For the couple themselves, it's a significant milestone, their 14th wedding anniversary. And this serene setting couldn't contrast more with the scenes outside Westminster Abbey 14 years ago. They're not staying in a palace, though. They've chosen a self-catering cottage while here. The visit to Mull and neighbouring Iona focusing on the importance of the natural world and communities. The couple will be meeting communities, their foundation funding some projects here locally. But I think for Kate in particular, this trip really focusing on things that are important to her. She's spoken recently about the power of nature, the almost spiritual inner peace she's found reconnecting with nature. And I think you would be hard-pressed to find a more peaceful, a more spiritual place than Mull and Iona here in the Inner Hebrides.
Laura, as always, thanks so much. Look forward to the coverage, as you say, in that very picturesque spot throughout the day. Laura Bundock there for us. Now, the government has announced that migrants convicted of sexual offences abroad won't be able to claim asylum in the UK or convicted of them here. Earlier, I spoke to Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. Here's what she had to say.
If someone is put on the sex offenders register, if they have committed a sex offence in that way, actually, they should not be able to be granted asylum in this country. We've had in place for some time a rule which says if someone has committed a particularly serious crime where the sentence is more than 12 months, then they can be denied asylum in the UK. I don't think that goes far enough. I really don't think that goes far enough. And that's why we're adding sex offences to the law as part of the border security bill that is passing through Parliament at the moment, which also strengthens counter-terror powers, for example, for going after criminal smuggler gangs.
The Home Secretary there with us last hour. Joining me now is the Shadow Home Office Minister, Matt Vickers. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Do you support this step?
Do you know what? If there's one thing the great British public have learned in the last 9 months, it's not to believe a thing that Labour say in the run-up to an election. Ask the pensioners, ask the farmers, ask the small business people. In fact, ask every council taxpayer in the land who was promised by Keir Starmer not a penny more on council tax this year. There are people that are getting increases of 10%. It's ridiculous. But actually, you should believe what they do, not what they say. And a few weeks ago, the Labour Party had the chance to vote on measures to do exactly this. A measure that would remove the need for a 12-month sanction on offence. We said that people who commit an offence, a foreign offender, should be removed. If you arrive here illegally, you commit an offence, you should be removed regardless of whether that offence carries a 12-month sanction. But then on top of that, as Yvette Cooper well knows, most of these things will end up in the courts with wranglings about the Human Rights Act. We saw Chicken Nugget Gate, we saw the case of the paedophile who couldn't be deported because it was feared that he'd face hostility in his own country. Yvette Cooper knows these things get tied up by the Human Rights Act. We had an amendment in Parliament to remove the Human Rights Act, disapply it from all cases relating to immigration and deportations like this. The Labour Party voted against it. Judge them by their actions, not their words, and particularly not the words that come out of the mouth in the run-up to a local election.
There's a lot there that you've mentioned. I guess it comes down to, and I had a similar discussion back and forth with the Home Secretary last hour, as to whether or not you want to remove the ability for the ECHR and the HRA to get involved in these areas. Are you saying you would pull out of the ECHR?
We've said that we would disapply the Human Rights Act to all immigration and deportation cases. And we would also take away any interim judgments from Strasbourg, which means you couldn't get tied up. If it was immigration, if it was related to a deportation like this, the laws, as decided by Parliament, the people who are elected to decide them in this country, would hold. They would not be overturned by Chicken Nugget Gate and similar.
But is that the same as removing yourself from the ECHR?
It's not exactly the same. That's a debate that will come forward. But this would solve this problem. It would allow us to...
No, but this is interesting, because what you're saying is that the announcement today, the intention that was very clear, wouldn't necessarily have effect because the courts would hold things up. But what you're not saying that your party would do is that you would not pull out of the ECHR, but many people would therefore continue to say that the courts would therefore still hold things up. So, you can't sort of criticise...
They wouldn't. That's a fact. So I'm sure we'll have the debate about the ECHR going forward. But what we are saying is we would disapply the Human Rights Act from everything relating to immigration, including interim judgments from Strasbourg, meaning they could not be prevented from deporting people. The outcome is that these people would still be deported after the judgment from our own domestic courts.
But so what would Strasbourg say to that? If the ECHR still applies, but you're saying... If it still has jurisdiction, but you're saying, oh, but it doesn't apply in this area, what are they likely to say?
We're making it black and white. We would legislate. If Labour had decided to vote for that amendment, 2 amendments there, the first one being you shouldn't have to wait for a sanction to be more than 12 months, the second being the disapplication of the human rights. Both of those would do the business in ensuring that the courts could not frustrate this situation. It's actually, the vast majority of these cases, our own courts making decisions based on the Human Rights Act and the way that they've worked that back from the ECHR.
Why do you not do that when you're in government?
Do you know what? We're under new leadership. I wasn't a minister in the last government. Kemi wasn't the leader of our party in the last government. We've looked at this. We've looked at what the British people feel and have to say about it. We've also looked at the increasing number of ridiculous cases, like Chicken Nugget Gate, like a paedophile who can't be deported because he'd face hostility in his own country. That is madness. That is not acceptable. We cannot allow these cases to keep coming out with these outcomes time and time again in ever-increasing number. It is not acceptable. The Labour Party did not vote with those measures that could have solved this problem.
But just to be clear, whereas Reform say that they would leave the ECHR, you're not saying that?
Reform say lots and lots of things to lots of different people at lots of different times. We've given...
they've been very clear about that.
Well, let's just talk about this bill that had these 2 amendments on where we had the chance to change the law. Reform didn't even contribute to the debate. They didn't come to Parliament to discuss the border security bill, the bill that was determining the way we deal with border security and immigration in this country. They didn't attend. They didn't contribute to the debate. They had nothing to say. It's all well and good saying it on Twitter. It's all well and good having a chat with you. But there was an opportunity in there to change the law, to change the outcome for the great British public and the consequences of this broken immigration system.
Well, that's fine. I'm just clarifying that your policy is not to withdraw from the ECHR. In terms of the latest that we've just seen in Canada overnight, do you think it suggests this extraordinary political comeback from Mark Carney the Liberal Party, that as a country we should be slightly more combative back to Donald Trump as opposed to conciliatory?
I think, do you know what? America is a great partner to us in terms of defence, in terms of trade. Lots of opportunities there. I know that we've had some diplomatic messes with members of the current government who said some of the wrong things about that administration that didn't get us off on the best footing. But actually, we should be working more closely with the US. We should be looking for that free trade agreement. We saw progress on it when Trump was last in office with the previous government. It all got poo-pooed when Biden came along. We got memorandums of understanding in place with different states across the US. Huge benefits to this country in terms of trade, huge benefits in terms of our economic outlook. That's what we should be doing. We should be pulling up a chair, getting around that table and working on a relationship that benefits us and the US.
So similar approach as is currently employed by the Prime Minister?
Well, perhaps, but we want him to see it doing it with a bit more rigour and perhaps being a little bit less offensive to leaders of those other major partners of ours.
Matt Vickers, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated. Let's have a look at the weather.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It'll be mostly dry with plenty of sunshine this week and will turn very warm. Temperatures look like peaking on Thursday. 29 Celsius, 84 Fahrenheit. Mainly dry and sunny now, but northern Scotland is quite cloudy, while the Northern Isles are dull and damp. There are a few fog patches elsewhere. It'll stay mostly dry and sunny this morning, with the cloud over Scotland breaking away from the far north. Expect further drizzly outbreaks there. It'll be mostly very warm, although cooler under the cloud over northern Scotland and where sea breezes develop around the coast. The afternoon will bring little change, although the extreme north should brighten up as patchy rain clears.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll have more reaction to the election victory of the Liberal Party, Mark Carney's party, in Canada.
On May the 1st, people across the country will head to the polls.
There's a lot at stake.
A seat in Parliament, 1,600 council seats and 6 mayoral elections, all up for grabs.
Who will win the tight race in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election?
Join us for Vote 2025. The results live as they come in, analysis and reaction.
Get the full story fast on Sky News.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up in just a moment, we'll discuss the impact that Donald Trump has had on America, Canada and the rest of the world as he marks 100 days in office. But first, a reminder of all the day's top stories. Leah's got that for us.
Thanks so much, Wilfred. Canada's Liberal Party leader, Mark Carney, has declared victory in the country's elections. His party enjoyed a swell of support in the wake of repeated comments by US President Donald Trump that he wanted Canada to become the 51st US state. People convicted of sexual offences will be blocked from claiming asylum in the UK under plans aimed at tightening border security. The Refugee Convention allows countries to refuse asylum to people who have committed a particularly serious crime, and ministers want to update UK law so the definition includes sex offenders. And power has started returning to parts of Spain and Portugal following a huge outage which brought hospitals and public transport to a standstill. A national emergency had been declared in Spain with 30,000 police officers deployed to maintain order.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Let's get more now on Canada's election, of course, won by the Liberal Party. Its leader, Mark Carney, spoke a little earlier and had some strong words for Donald Trump.
These are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen. But we also must recognize the reality that our world has fundamentally changed. And now, more than ever, it is a time for ambition. It is a time to be bold, to meet this crisis with overwhelming positive force of a united Canada. Because we are going to build, baby, build.
Well, our correspondent James Matthews was there for Carney's speech and sent the latest.
By my reckoning, it's the biggest political comeback in modern democracy. Carney's Liberals were 25 points behind their Conservative opponents in January. Now, just 3 months on of Donald Trump, they have reversed that and they have won the election. The question right now is the extent of the victory. Will Carney scoop the majority that he wants, or will he have to settle for the awkwardness and the political challenges of a minority government? But to get to where they are tonight, the Liberals, once written off, have written political history. A stunning victory, and of course, it's all based around Donald Trump. This campaign of Mark Carney's, it was all about the threat of Donald Trump. He described it as an existential threat, and he fleshed that out. He took that campaign belligerence onto the stage with him when he delivered his victory speech, talking about how President Trump wants to break us so that he can own us. He spoke of American betrayal, a hinge moment of history. So clearly he is reinforcing a new muscular politics in Canada, a muscular politics in terms of dealing with Donald Trump.
James Matthews there for us. Well, Mark Carney should quite probably be thanking Donald Trump for his election victory. Today marks 100 days in the White House for President Trump. Let's have a look back at some of his most memorable moments.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
This is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This has never happened before.
The threat that I worry the most about
vis-a-vis Europe is the threat from within. The retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values.
We need Greenland, very importantly, for international security. We don't need their cars, we don't need their lumber, we don't need their energy, we don't need anything from Canada. So when I say they should be a state, I mean that.
They're getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid, because we have a big job to do. No other president would have done what I did. No other president. I know the presidents, they wouldn't have done it.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here.
Well, trade and tariffs are one of the big themes, of course, of those first 100 days. Cordelia Lynch joins us now from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And Cordelia, it's great to get this snapshot from Vietnam in particular, because during Trump's first term, they were seen as a bit of a beneficiary of his trade policy. Not so much this time.
No, not this time. And this is a very anxious moment for Vietnam. It's been a story of huge, miraculous economic growth previously, but then came this so-called Liberation Day, where Donald Trump whacked Vietnam with 46% tariffs. Now, they are currently on pause, but they're taking nothing for granted here. The government was one of the first to go to Donald Trump with some kind of olive branch, trying to get them back on side, offering them 0% tariffs for any US products being brought into Vietnam. The problem here is really about the trade deficit. That is what Donald Trump doesn't like. Vietnam is exporting a lot of what America needs when it comes to electronics and garments, but in return, Vietnam is not purchasing US products. They want to see things like Boeings and semiconductors brought in to the country. They want to see a commitment from Vietnam on that. But this is also, of course, about China and the issue of something called transshipments. Now, Washington and Donald Trump are saying that they want to see Vietnam clamp down on China using Vietnam to effectively repackage Chinese products illegally under the auspice of them having made in Vietnam labels. Now, the extent to which that is happening, we just don't know. But I think we will see a shift now in the dynamic of trade between America and Vietnam and across Southeast Asia. They have a really delicate tightrope to walk here in Vietnam. They want to keep good relations with China and America, with China being effectively their big brother. They can't rule out all manufacturing here. And you've had huge companies like Samsung that have come here, that have opened up and that have generated a lot of money, and they want to try and hold on to that, but they're going to have to give something to Washington to keep them on side. Now, we've been spending the last couple of days in the garment factories on the outskirts of Ho Chi Minh City. Now, this is a really trade-dependent economy here. About 85% of the economy is based on exports, and garments a big factor in that. Some of the factories we were in, they said they're trying to rush through orders to the United States because they're worried about the pass-on costs to consumers. They're not taking it for granted. Some have already started making preparations, pursuing relationships, trade relationships with others outside of America and China and across Southeast Asia. So they are preparing for the worst, but they are hoping for the best. These negotiations with Washington, they think are moving well, and they're hoping they can reduce that 46% tariff to around 10 to 20%. That would be manageable, but no guarantees yet.
Really fascinating stuff, Cordelia. Thank you so much for that perspective. And of course, Cordelia's full report, well worth watching. It's on the Sky News website or app. We're going to continue this discussion now about Trump's first 100 days with the Republican strategist, Corinne Clark, who's in Washington, and the former senior advisor to senior Democrat Nancy Pelosi, Michael Yaki, who's in Paris this morning. A very good morning to you both. A very quick first snapshot question to each of you, and I have a feeling I know roughly what numbers are going to come out of here. But Corinne, out of 10, first 100 days for Trump?
I think we've seen a real 10 here. Everything that Trump campaigned on, he is implementing now. And I think where you see criticism is where you saw criticism of Donald Trump always. Republicans who liked his speeches on the campaign trail are really happy with what he's doing now, and Democrats who didn't like what he was talking about on the campaign trail aren't really happy with what he's doing now. It is a typical partisan divide, but I personally am very happy, and the MAGA supporting friends that I know are very pleased with this administration.
Michael, rating it out of 10?
Well, I think it'd be sort of, just de rigueur for me to say a 0, but I'd say about a 2. Look, we're talking about a president who said I'd solve Ukraine in the first 24 hours. That isn't happening. It's not happening. You saw a lot of flurry, a lot of flood the zone tactics that were going on by the administration. We're going to bring in Elon Musk, taking on the universities in this country, immigration crackdowns, all those kinds of things that you see in the headlines today. What's interesting is if you read the polls is that there's an existential doubt about Donald Trump that I think is at the core of the American people, which is this person doing too much? Is he exceeding his executive authority? And there's a discomfort, certainly among Republicans, and a vast majority among Democrats, but more importantly, the independents. And the independents are the ones who really control elections in America right now. And they are very concerned about what's going on. They're concerned about the economic policies of the administration. So, I think that polls are always a snapshot, but there's certain trends here that I'd be very worried about if I were Donald Trump.
Corinne, I'm interested, let's talk about trade specifically for a moment. Even if this all works out, the sort of policies announced on Liberation Day that we're still dissecting and working out where it's going to end up, even if it works out incredibly in a year or two's time, is it fair to say that it could have been done in a more constructive, conciliatory and warm way with allies in particular? Put China aside, but talk about the UK as a clear example. Could he have been more friendly towards allies?
I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made that a million things could have been done a million different ways, but the fact of the matter is that they never have been. And we've had 50 years of trade deals where America got the worst end of the deal and nobody was willing to renegotiate it. So we can now nitpick what Donald Trump has done, and we can suggest that it should have been done just this tiny bit different of a way. But the fact is that he is actually doing it. These are trade policies that he has talked about since the 1980s. He's the only one who's done them. I really think he's the only Republican who would have gone through with it. And that is something that means a lot to America, especially in the Rust Belt, these states that have been hit hard by terrible trade policies over the last half a century. And I'm certainly glad that this negotiation has started. There will always be hiccups and there'll always be something to fine tune. I think the administration has been very open to that feedback, and they are listening to people and they are negotiating further, and that is the goal. But the conversation needed to start, and that takes a man of action, and that is what Donald Trump did.
Michael, I wanted to ask you about immigration. Have you been impressed by the fall in illegal crossings on the southern border?
Well, I think that the whole thing about the southern crossings is sort of a red herring. Yes, they've done stuff to sort of halt that, but the problem is not. The American people have sort of seen past that. They understand, okay, border enforcement, that's something that we need to deal with. And the Biden administration was doing that as well. I don't think any administration has said we just want completely open borders. But when you take the step beyond where you have American children, a child who was undergoing cancer treatment being deported along with their mother, when you have the man in Venezuela who was thrown out as a gang member when there's no finding that he was. These are things where people are being arrested in the courtrooms and in hospitals. I think these are things that the American people have a very, very great discomfort with. And to just go back to one point about treating your allies better, here we are approaching the 80th anniversary of VE Day, when we stood shoulder to shoulder with the UK, and in 100 days, this president has completely upended that relationship. It's not as special as it used to be. He's targeting a country that has always been part of the willing with us, whether it's Afghanistan, the Middle East, elsewhere. So, this is not something that is unusual. This is not something that is a nitpick. This is a fundamental restructuring of America's role, especially with regard to Western Europe. And I think it's something that needs to be talked about some more because of the importance to the security of the Western democracies in Europe.
Corinne, if a recession did materialize, would you alter your rating of 10 out of 10, or would it be a worthwhile cost to reestablish the trading relationship as it exists with the rest of the world?
I think a recession is now, it's hilarious that this is a big concern of the media, because we've been in a recession for basically the last 5 years, and we have renegotiated what the word recession means. And now you want to say, if we're in a recession, that means you won't support Trump anymore, right? That's not true. I do think the trade deals are completely worth it. A recession is not off the table because of the terrible economic policies that we've seen under the Biden administration. We've been set up to fail here. But I do think in the long term, setting up America to create our own essential goods, to restore manufacturing, to renegotiate the trade deficits, those are all benefits to America and to the American worker. And I do think that will make us better and stronger in the long term. Obviously, I hope to avoid a recession, but we will work through it either way.
Michael, final question to you. What do you make of the result in the Canadian election overnight? Do you think that will be something that Democrats are looking at? I guess I'll put it a different way, a question I was going to come to, but what rating out of 10 would you give to your party over the first 100 days? Have they done their job effectively or not?
I'd give it about the same rating I gave Donald Trump, about it too. The Democratic Party needs to sort of figure out what its message is going to be. It needs to figure out how it's going to work with the American people and deal with the policies of Donald Trump. They haven't really figured that out yet. The midterms could be a disaster for Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a benefit for the Democrats. They may win, but in this case, it's just a referendum on Trump. What that means for 2028, what that means for building a party, is something that I think that my colleagues and my friends, we have been talking about this for the past 2 to 3 months about what is it that we can do to change who we are to better connect with the American people. Because one thing that Corinne said is right. When people's perception of the economy during the Biden administration didn't connect with what was really going on in the world. But it wasn't renegotiating the word recession. We had job growth, we had job strength. The economy was still going strong. It's still it was the envy of the world. But now, we have to decide what it is, who we are, and reconnect with working men and women, which we did not do a good job of. So there's a lot to do. Mark Carney certainly gives inspiration and hope, but I think it's inspiration and hope to the people of Canada. And I think that, Mark owes a huge debt of gratitude to Donald Trump for taking the Liberal Party that was, as your reporter said, 25 points behind just 3 or 4 months ago and taking a very good victory last night.
Michael and Corinne, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you both this morning.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll hear from Alexander Usyk and Daniel Dubois ahead of their heavyweight world championship rematch at Wembley.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna.
We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Durman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started.
And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people.
This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here.
My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
They call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first. Yusra al-Bagher, Sky News.
The Yazidis are a very small religious group, and in 2014 ISIS seemed to have set about their destruction.
Chilling reports describe ISIL militants rounding up families, conducting mass executions, and enslaving Yazidi women.
Some Yazidi survivors refused to be beaten by ISIS. But the suffering of the Yazidis is far from over. 10 years of darkness on Sky News.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Welcome back. It's the very first undisputed heavyweight world championship to be held in the UK. Ukrainian boxer Alexander Usyk, who holds 3 world titles, will fight Britain's Daniel Dubois, who holds 1 at Wembley Stadium on the 19th of July.
And only one will walk away with everything in the highly anticipated rematch. Well, Sky's Jackie Beltrell has been speaking to the heavyweights about how they're both feeling ahead of the fight.
I think it was a great fight. It's a Wembley. I think, how many people? 97?
Yes.
Yeah, 97. I think will be 100. He's a dangerous guy. He's a young world champion, very motivated. My focus, this fight, very great.
So, if you keep your belts and you take his belt and you walk away from Wembley with all of the belts, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world again, what else is there for you to prove?
Nothing. Just sport. Just sport. Maybe after this fight, I say, hey, listen, take my belt, because I go to rest. Maybe not.
So you might retire after this fight?
Yeah, maybe.
You told me before that you used your money from the fights to help people in Ukraine from the war. Do you feel that peace is a bit closer?
I don't think about it. I just want to what my Ukrainian country will be worth, and don't have the war and soldiers, Russian soldiers. I know we win.
How are you going to do this? Such a big task.
Make it a bloodbath in there, turn it into a bloodbath. You know, do what I have to do and what I know how to do. Bully him, be a heavyweight, just do all the things I never did last time. He got away lucky. He never really felt my power last time, and that's a whole nother story, but this time I'm on it. I fight for my family, I fight for all the generations that have come before me and all the fallen soldiers out there that they know who they are, so, you know, yeah, it's a lot.
Do you sort of think it's your destiny to do this? You were kind of born to do it.
Yes, 100%. I have that feeling, 100%. If you know, whatever going on in my personal life, whatever, this is my just destiny, and I'm walking towards it.
More of Jackie's interview with those two heavyweight boxers is available on the Sky News website and app. Meanwhile, let's have a quick look at the weather.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It'll be mostly dry with plenty of sunshine this week and will turn very warm. Temperatures look like peaking on Thursday at 29 Celsius, 84 Fahrenheit. It's mainly dry and sunny now, but northern Scotland is quite cloudy, while the Northern Isles are dull and damp. There are a few fog patches elsewhere. It'll stay mostly dry and sunny this morning, with the cloud over Scotland breaking away from the far north, except further drizzly outbreaks will be prominent there. It'll also be warm, although cooler under the cloud, over northern Scotland, where sea breezes develop around the coasts.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Lots more still to come here on The Breakfast Show. I'm really looking forward to 9:30. We're going to talk to Crawford Falconer, who was one of the sort of high-profile trade negotiators under the last government, lost his job at the start of this government, see what he makes with the Canadian result and, I guess, lack of a trade deal so far with the US. Between the UK and the US.
Yeah, so far. And also, you know, there's lots of talk about Donald Trump lobbying the UK government to get a golf tournament at his golf course in Scotland. And the fact that, you know, is that something that the government is thinking that could sweeten the pill, as it were, for Donald Trump? You know, these things appear to be surprisingly personal.
Yeah. Quite an easy offer, isn't it? A golf tournament for a trade deal?
I'd take it up.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we'll discuss that and much more after this short break.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. Mark Carney declares victory for his Liberal Party in the Canadian election and issues harsh words for Donald Trump.
Should the US president's first 100 days in the White House be considered a success or a failure? We'll ask the UK's former chief trade negotiator, Sir Crawford Falconer.
Plus, we'll bring you details of a new crackdown promised by Labour as small boat crossings hit record levels.
It's the 29th of April. Your headlines. Mark Carney's Liberals ride to victory on a wave of Canadian fury at Donald Trump.
President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen.
Mark Carney has just delivered a victory speech and spoken of American betrayal and a hinge moment of history.
Also ahead, the government says that migrants convicted of sex crimes will be denied asylum. Cheers in Lisbon as the power is turned back on after a massive blackout across Portugal and Spain. A very good morning to you. Mark Carney's Liberal Party has won the Canadian election. After declaring victory, Carney issued a warning to Donald Trump. He told crowds the US president is trying to break us so that America can own us and that will never happen. Well, in a moment, we'll speak to Ed and Mari about this election victory. But first, James Matthews has this report summing up the night's action.
He styled himself the man to take on Trump. Canadians took him at his word. Mark Carney, the duly elected Prime Minister of Canada, addressed a victory rally overnight.
My message to every Canadian is this: no matter where you live, no matter what language you speak, no matter how you voted, I will always do my best to represent everyone who calls Canada home. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen. When I sit down with President Trump, it will be to discuss the future economic and security relationship between two sovereign nations.
Carney has led an astonishing political comeback. His Liberal Party was dead and buried as an electoral force last January. What turned Canadians was the election before theirs, and the US president who imposed tariffs and threatened to annex Canada as the 51st state. In the UK, Mark Carney is the familiar face, with crisis management on his CV. He was the Bank of England governor through Brexit, having led the Bank of Canada through the 2008 crash. Across Canada, a central issue was who was best placed to deal with Donald Trump. Polls reflected a public trust in the finance man shaping for a fight.
That contest is not decided between Carney and Trump, it's decided internally in America. But if Canada can be strong and put up resistance, then I think, governors and the Senate and even the House and the markets will all have a say in it.
He is the political rookie who's led the biggest comeback in modern democracy. Carney's Liberals, once written off, have written history. He styled himself as the man best placed to tackle the nemesis next door. It's the biggest job in his intrigue.
When I went to vote with my two kids who are 10 and 8, they were wondering how am I choosing their future with Trump in mind.
Now we have a strong majority government and we have a strong position to negotiate.
Respect is what he's going to get from a lot of other countries as well as our own people.
Winning this election was a political challenge that mattered to Mark Carney. To Canada, the next one matters more. James Matthews, Sky News, in Ottawa.
Well, let's talk more about the significance of the Canadian election result. Ed Conway, who knows Mark Carney well, of course, from his time at Bank of England governor, and Mari both here. Mari, the first question I have, and it was really interesting hearing both Yvette Cooper and Matt Vickers from the Conservatives continue to strike the same tone on this, which is we continue to want to be Trump's friend and take a conciliatory approach and get a free trade deal over the line. even when we've just had a pretty stark example that talking tough towards the bully reaps at least political rewards, even if it's not yet a free trade deal between Canada and the US?
Yeah, I think it is proof that it works. But also, if you look at the polling from here in the UK, Donald Trump is not popular. And that's actually working quite well for the Liberal Democrats at the moment. They're one of the only parties that feel able or free enough to be really quite heavily critical of Donald Trump. That's partly because they don't expect to be in power and therefore they haven't got to worry about damaging that relationship beyond repair, I suppose. So it was interesting, as you say, both Conservative and Labour this morning not wanting to really kind of, as it were, throw any shade on the Republicans while that trade negotiation is still ongoing. We saw Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson yesterday, saying things were moving positively and progressing positively between the UK and the US on those negotiations. But I think also there'll be a little bit of relief this morning about the fact that actually across the Atlantic, you know, Keir Starmer has an ally. Keir Starmer released a statement this morning congratulating Mark Carney on his success. He said the UK and Canada are the closest of allies, partners and friends. With your leadership and personal ties to the UK, I know the relationship between our countries will continue to grow. And then he goes on to say our partnership is based on shared history and values with a shared sovereign, and I look forward to strengthening our ties following our successful meeting in Downing Street last month. And then he goes on to talk about how he's going to meet with Carney at the G7 in Canada later in the year as well.
And one of the, obviously, aspects of his victory was taking on Donald Trump, and I guess Trump's rhetoric towards Canada presented an opportunity there. Obviously, he was also a break from the previous leader of his party, Justin Trudeau, in a number of ways, one of which is this is the left-of-centre party, the Liberal Party, and Trudeau perhaps was a little bit further left than some others. But Mark Carney is a former Goldman Sachs partner and obviously a former central banker. He's not actually a typical left-of-centre party leader, and in that sense, he offered something different.
No, he's not typical. He's not a career politician, except that I suppose, you know, even when he was central banker here, when he was governor of the Bank of England, a lot of people were thinking, well, this is only a kind of, you know, a stopping point until eventually he goes into Canadian politics. And he was always associated. He's always seen himself as a liberal, so he's always been part of that Canadian kind of political tradition. What for me is particularly interesting is if you think about what's happened in Canada, and it is extraordinary. You know, it was only a couple of months ago it looked like the Liberals were finished, essentially. A complete drubbing in the elections. The Conservatives were way in the lead. And Mark Carney has come in. He is, as you say, he's a different kind of a person to Justin Trudeau. He, nonetheless, is a former central banker. If a lot of people saw that Trudeau was, or thought that Trudeau was kind of this figure of globalism, you know, he was into going to big international political gatherings. He was seen as part of that kind of the Davos set. Carney is very much in that kind of mould as well. In fact, some would argue he's even more so. And if Trudeau was seen as very positive about like environmental taxes and net zero, Mark Carney, you know, he headed up a UN commission on net zero. So in some senses, he is just as much, if not even more, of the kinds of things that Justin Trudeau was associated with. And yet he has done so well in this election. He's completely turned things around. And of course, people will ask the question, to what extent is that Mark Carney? To what extent is it Donald Trump? And I think, you know, a lot of it looks like it is Donald Trump. I mean, maybe the vast majority. But nonetheless, a lot of people were talking, you know, was saying back at the time that Mark Carney was starting to stand, you know, people who know him for a long time were saying, well, you know, I don't know if he can really cope with time in opposition. He's used to being a winner, but he's also very lucky. And it turns out he has been extraordinarily lucky. He's obviously made some of that luck himself, but things have just gone in an amazing way as far as he and that party are concerned.
I was going to say, if Sam Coates was here, he'd say you make your own luck in politics. So fair play to him on that. Just quickly, Ed, on the trade between the UK and Canada. I mean, it's not as much of a holy grail, a free trade deal with Canada as it would be with America?
No, not with America. I mean, we've got a kind of continuity deal that follows from, you know, post-Brexit. Worth saying, I was just in Washington last week. A lot of people on the UK side think that we are that close to getting a deal. It's not the full kind of trade deal, but some sort of a deal with America. In fact, they think within the next couple of weeks, you know, it could be the next week and a half. So I think there's a lot of sense that we just need to get that dealt with before we deal with anything else. But of course, what does that say about about Mark Carney? What does it say for our relationship with the EU? Because we've got talks with the EU ongoing at the same time. So back to your point at the start, how is this going to look? And that we are pushing towards the US, whereas everyone else is being left slightly behind.
Very quick final question, Ed, because you're not here to talk about this, but I know you're interested in it. The power outage in Spain and Portugal.
Yes.
Yesterday. Your take on that?
Fascinating. Well, at the moment, the government have yet to tell us, either in Spain or Portugal, have yet to tell us what it was. And there's all these different theories. Is it subterfuge? Was it something to do with the weather? Perhaps the most plausible theory, and again, it is just a theory at the moment, is when you are massively reliant on things like solar and wind, and there's a lot of solar and wind, and you don't have that much kind of gas power generation going on, then it does potentially leave you more vulnerable to things like this happening if you haven't dealt with, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but there's something called inertia in the system, and it's basically because when you've got lots of generators turning at a certain RPM, it just means there's the ability of a big grid, a big power grid, to deal with sudden falls. When you have a lot of solar, when you don't have a lot of those things turning, then you're much more vulnerable. And so that's the kind of scary thing, is the system more vulnerable to it? And theoretically, the theory would say it is, but we're going to have to wait and see whether, what the final explanation actually is.
We really sadly don't have time for more on this, but you lie there when you say you don't want to go down a rabbit hole.
I'm very happy to. Very happy to.
We'll perhaps do a special podcast episode on it in due course. Ed Conway, thanks so much as always. Mari's going to stick around because we're going to talk about the big government announcement this morning that migrants convicted of sexual offences abroad won't be able to claim asylum in the UK. We've got comments now from the Home Secretary and by Matt Vickers of the Conservatives on the programme in the last 2 hours.
If someone is put on the sex offenders register, if they have committed a sex offence in that way, actually, they should not be able to be granted asylum in this country. We've had in place for some time a rule which says if someone has committed a particularly serious crime where the sentence is more than 12 months, then they can be denied asylum in the UK. I don't think that goes far enough. I really don't think that goes far enough. And that's why we're adding sex offences to the law as part of the border security bill that is passing through Parliament at the moment, which also strengthens counter-terror powers, for example, for going after criminal smuggler gangs.
What we are saying is we would disapply the Human Rights Act from everything relating to immigration, including interim judgments from Strasbourg, meaning they could not be prevented from deporting people. The outcome is that these people would still be deported after the judgment from our own domestic courts.
Mari, so what is the sort of key takeaway on this? Clearly, it's a big announcement. There's a lot to it, but there's some criticism that it won't be definitive in terms of all cases of this ilk.
Yeah, exactly. So the government are saying that this is going to potentially have a great impact on stopping foreign criminals from being allowed to stay in the UK. But it's really not that simple. First of all, this is only a small number of people, as far as we can tell, but they won't give us the data on this. So it's for people who've been put onto the sex offenders register that might be denied that refugee status, as it were. However, there are still other avenues for them to use in the courts if they do want to stay. So they can use the Human Rights Act, they can use the European Convention of Human Rights. And that is what has caused such a huge political row in the past several years, really, when it comes to foreign criminals. And so you've had people using different articles, for instance, in the European Convention of Rights. One is the most notable is the right to family life. So if you have children here, you can argue that, your children would be affected if you were deported. The other article that people have often used before is that they would be persecuted if they were sent back to their country of origin, perhaps because they've converted to, let's say, Christianity, if they came from a religious country that was not Christian, perhaps because they say they might have a sexual orientation that therefore would make them persecuted. And they've used those as, for instance, examples of defences that have allowed them to stay in this country despite having committed crimes, whether that be a sexual crime or other sorts of crimes. And therefore, this is the difficulty, and this is what, to an extent, the Reform Party especially, and also the Conservative Party, feel that they're on quite safe ground here, is that they are arguing that something like this is not going to be enough to stop some of those more kind of high-profile cases that other people have found quite surprising, perhaps shocking, and therefore Reform would say, time to leave the ECHR. The Conservative Party would say it's not time to leave the ECHR yet, but it would be time to disapply the Human Rights Act to stop some of those claims happening. So there's a kind of broad spectrum of thought politically on how you deal with some of these cases.
I found it confusing, the Conservative argument, if I'm honest, in terms of exactly what that middle ground is. But either way, it's clearly an issue that's top of people's minds as we, again, approach polling day, local election polling day on Thursday. Maura Christopher, thank you very much. Time for all of the day's other stories now. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you so much, Wilfred. We're going to take you to this top story about the Belfast-based rap trio. This is called Kneecap, and they've apologised to the families of murdered MPs, Joe Cox and David Amess. They say they didn't intend to cause harm after a video from 2023 appeared to show a band member urging people to kill Tory MPs. Well, the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has called for them to be prosecuted. There are calls for the government to require all new homes to be built with solar panels. The local government association says the move could cut both household bills and meet climate change targets. Currently, 40% of new homes built have solar panels. The sugar tax applied to fizzy drinks could be extended to milkshakes. The government is consulting on proposals to end the exemption from the tax for dairy-based drinks, as well as non-dairy substitutes like oats and rice. The Treasury said young people only receive 3.5% of their calcium intake from such drinks. US President Donald Trump marks 100 days in the White House today. He's heading to Michigan for a rally to celebrate the occasion. Our US correspondent Mark Stone is already there and sent us this report.
It has been just 100 days.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
A presidency like no other. Norms upended.
The chainsaw for bureaucracy.
Allies shocked.
Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state. We need Greenland for national security.
And shafted.
You're gambling with World War III.
Moments no one predicted.
Trump Gaza, #1. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip. We'll own it.
And the tariffs.
I'd like to see the chart if you have it.
Everyone predicted them, but it didn't soften the blow.
China, first row.
Until he U-turned.
They were getting yippy, you know?
Migrants removed with court-defying deportations. In every way, for the delighted and the disgusted, this has been a truly consequential 3 months. And he will mark it here later today, a rally on the edge of Detroit, the Motor City in Michigan, the battleground state which helped to propel him back to the White House. To fix America, Donald Trump first needed to convince people that it's broken, and many did not need convincing. Look for decline here, and you will find it easily. Communities left behind. Look for bureaucracy and waste, you will find that too. Common sense silenced by wokeism. Many can relate to that. Immigration out of control. Well, politicians have been struggling with that for decades. And in just 100 days, Donald Trump has harnessed all of that into a package of change that feels like nothing short of a revolution. At a park on the banks of the Detroit River, the scorecards reflect the enduring divide.
Give him a 10.
I would say 10 too. I mean, he's human, he's doing his best.
Oh, 0. If I could do lower than 0, lower.
We're all so angry because we're under angry leadership, and that's not good.
The polling 100 days in tells the bigger picture, because with a 40% approval rating, it's lower than any president in over 70 years. And yet the Democrats are doing no better either. Down the road from the president's rally, hopes and fears at the Detroiter bar.
He's helping the middle class of the country.
Sounds like he's convinced you.
Yeah. He convinced me the first time.
I'm a cook, and I got 2 kids to provide for. But this right now, it's bad. It's real bad.
You sound really worried.
I am. I'm a citizen. I was born in America, so yeah, I am really worried.
Of one fact, there is no debate. After just 100 days, he is proving to be a leader of profound global consequence. Mark Stone, Sky News in Michigan.
Lots more still to come here on The Breakfast Show. Did moving to green energy make Spain and Portugal more vulnerable to blackouts? We'll have that discussion coming up next.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Welcome back. In Spain and Portugal, things seem to be getting back to normal after yesterday's massive power outage. Well, in a moment, we'll speak to an expert about whether moving to solar has made the grid more vulnerable and whether the UK could be exposed to something similar. But first, let's watch Ashna's report of what's happened in Spain and Portugal for the last 24 hours.
The sound of relief rings out in parts of Spain and Portugal after being cut off. Some are now reconnected. But authorities warn it could take weeks to fully restore. Monday saw carnage in the Spanish capital. No traffic lights at this roundabout makes for an almost lawless scene as cars and pedestrians navigate the disorder. It's a picture replicated across the country and in Portugal too. Both nations were entirely cut off from power. As the train network grounded to a halt, some stranded passengers in Valencia walked the rest of their journeys. Railway lines deserted and phone lines dead. By lunchtime, office workers poured onto the streets, dazed and disconnected.
We were working very well. Suddenly the computer went down. We thought it was a normal blackout, as it happens sometimes, but then we heard it was a cyber attack. This was through information through the poor connection we had to the internet. After that, we stopped having any comms, no access to the internet, nothing.
Passengers wanting to travel in and out of the countries are desperate for movement that's simply not happening. Flights in and out are either severely delayed or cancelled. Here at Madrid Airport and Barcelona too are running off emergency contingency generators. There are queues everywhere you look, for taxi stands, for information desks, people desperate for some nugget of news. 2 countries thrown into darkness, and the cause is still unknown. Ashna Harinag, Sky News in Madrid.
Well, I'm joined now by Steve Rumbold, the Managing Director in the Enterprise Security Risk Management team at Kroll and formerly Head of Cyber Risk at National Grid and a member at EDF responsible for physical and cyber security of critical infrastructure. Very well qualified to be here today. Steve, good morning to you.
Thanks very much for having me.
What's your first sort of snapshot take of what happened?
Well, we've heard some explanations, unusual atmospheric conditions, but we won't know exactly what happened for some time, and that'll be the subject of an investigation. But generally speaking, extreme weather conditions, unusual weather conditions can combine with faults and hazards, particularly in the context of sometimes decades-old infrastructure. Added to that, the complexity of new types of energy generation and more distribution companies. You have a very complex, old and new situation. Added to that is the possibility of human error or accident or even potentially malicious actions. That seems to have been ruled out so far in the situation in Spain and Portugal. But that combination of possibilities can cause this sort of situation to occur, albeit it's very rare.
So whatever the initial trigger was, you mentioned this atmospheric pressure point, whatever the initial trigger was, to what extent is this attempt to switch to renewables a factor in how big the consequences were? We were talking with Ed Conway about this earlier and the need for inertia, and when you do have shocks to the system, the ability for some more traditional means of power generation to pick up the slack quicker than say, renewables. Is that a factor, or are people just overly politicising that?
I think it's important to have a mix. I think the move to renewables has happened very quickly. Things like offshore wind, battery energy storage all need to be incorporated into networks. We have more interconnectors with different countries, and certainly in mainland Europe, that's a major factor. So I think it's more the pace of change and the complexity that needs to be mastered that is possibly behind these kind of errors and these sort of outages.
What would happen to our grid faced with some kind of similar wildcard factor like this?
So our system operator and the transmission network operator is well practiced and conducts an awful lot of research in terms of both faults and hazards and human factors, including malicious actions, and plans accordingly. Resilience regulation has increased enormously since 2018, particularly, and now with the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill coming into force, that's expanded the scope of the regulation. So we're moving to a much more sort of enhanced position where we're able to deal with these issues. But in terms of a highly unusual but potentially catastrophic event, such as a national or regional blackout, those plans are well practiced in terms of restarting the grid, generating facilities that are able to start themselves. And those traditionally have been not renewable type energy.
When you do see our mix obviously growing with more wind and renewables, which is obviously good to see when it's available, some people suggest but the rest of the grid's not ready to take it because offshore wind farms aren't in the same places that traditional gas power stations were. Is our grid needing of significant upgrades, whether for resilience reasons or for that reason?
I think both. National Grid is spending an awful lot of money, in the billions, updating the transmission network to be able to safely and securely move the energy from offshore to where we need it. That needs to happen. And at the same time, the resilience of those systems, both in terms of faults and hazards, and, as I said, other situations, potentially malicious acts, the resilience of that is being increased as well. But I think it's important for businesses and individuals to worry not so much about the likelihood of these things happening, but the plausibility of it.
and to have resilience and business continuity plans in place, no matter what the cause or potentially who's behind it, because what needs to happen is getting back on your feet as a business, as a family or an individual, and having a plan to deal with that.
Steve, really interesting. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much indeed.
Right, we're going to have a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, success or failure? We'll discuss Donald Trump's first 100 days in power with the UK's former chief trade negotiator, Sir Crawford Falconer, and then we'll get reaction with our very own Dominic Wackel. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up in just a moment, we're going to be talking about the Canadian election result and also Trump's first 100 days in power. But first, a reminder of all of the day's top stories. Leah.
Thanks, Wilfred. Canada's Liberal Party leader, Mark Carney, has declared victory in the country's elections. His party enjoyed a swell of support in the wake of repeated comments by US President Donald Trump that he wanted Canada to become the 51st US state.
President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen. But we also must recognize the reality that our world has fundamentally changed.
People convicted of sexual offences will be blocked from claiming asylum in the UK under plans aimed at tightening border security. The Refugee Convention allows countries to refuse asylum to people who have committed a particularly serious crime. And ministers want to update UK law so the definition includes sex offenders. And power has started returning to parts of Spain and Portugal following a huge outage which brought hospitals and public transport to a standstill. A national emergency has been declared in Spain with 30,000 police officers deployed to maintain order.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Right, to our top couple of stories today, the Canadian election victory and Trump's first 100 days in office. Joining us now are the former UK chief trade negotiator, Sir Crawford Falconer, and as you can see, our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, is here with us as well. Sir Crawford, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. I just want to set the scene quick with Dominic, first of all, on both those stories. First question, Dominic, is what an extraordinary comeback for the Liberal Party, and Mark Carney particularly.
Yeah, I mean, coming back from, I think, 25 points behind, I think, to, it looks like, so far, the biggest poll reversal in modern political history anywhere in the world, potentially, which is an extraordinary response to what's been happening south of the border in America. And I think Carney's response also, and what he was saying in his speech there, is really indicative of the way the world is going. His speech was a Canada-first speech, as Donald Trump's, in response to Donald Trump's America-first policy. And, the critics will say this is what Trump is doing to the world. He's breaking it down from multilateral cooperation into fortress nations, retreating behind barriers, having to fend for themselves. Each country, in Canada, is the first to go in that direction and will be the first, potentially, of many.
And Sir Crawford, it's fascinating to see, hard to separate the two, that what Trump is doing domestically and towards allies played a huge part in this election victory for Mark Carney, and he weaponised it well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think Carney feels that he owes Trump anything, but there's no question that he wouldn't be Prime Minister if you hadn't had Trump doing what Trump was doing south of the border. Was that a cunning plan from Washington, D.C.? I don't think so, and I think that sums up the reality of the world we're dealing with now.
It's raised the question as to whether people here should alter their tactics in negotiating with Donald Trump. You've tried to negotiate with his administration the first time round. Do you think combative is the way that the bully responds, is the right way to respond to the bully, or do you think conciliatory is the right approach still?
It depends on the circumstances. I think the Canadians were in a vastly different set of circumstances to the UK. I mean, it's a massive direct effect on the Canadian economy, and it's right bang smack in the middle of an election. I mean, in those circumstances, looking as if you are weak is not the way to go. Plus, economically, interestingly, the Canadians actually have leverage precisely because they're so integrated into the US North American economy. So I think in that situation, I don't really think the Canadians had any choice. They were facing a major threat to their economy, and retaliation made sense in those circumstances in order to exert some countermeasures, and they had the capacity to affect the US auto industry. So I think it made sense for them. I'm not convinced that it made sense for the UK to do it at the time. Doesn't mean to say it wouldn't be the case in the future. But for now, the US is doing so much damage to itself, I don't think there's anything we could do with our own pop gun retaliation that would have any impact.
Dominic, it's fascinating to see. Of course, Canada had an election coming up, which we don't. That sort of changes the calculus as well. Just snapshot for us this Trump 100 days point, because, ironically, if we'd done a snapshot 70 days in, or as you did 50 days in, you might be talking about very different points. And it's fascinating what's happened since Liberation Day, which now becomes the dominant narrative.
Yeah, I think 50 days in, a lot of the concern was about what Trump was doing in terms of soft power. He was dismantling tools of soft power that have served America very well in a way that just seemed like soft power vandalism, particularly US aid, and we travel around the world looking at the impact of that. That was jeopardising the health and welfare of tens of millions of people, but also jeopardising America's standing in the world and potentially leaving a vacuum which China is only too eager to fill, and other rivals of America. What we are seeing, I think, 100 days in is, it was clearly emerging 50 days in, but we are now seeing pretty much fully formed the beginnings of a just completely different America, the likes of which the world hasn't really seen. And we are seeing, I think, a sort of radicalism and zeal in this president that we didn't see the first time around, because the first time around he was contained by what you might regard as some seasoned, more conventional players. There are far fewer of those in this administration. He has a real determination to pull through whatever the agenda, push through whatever the agenda is. It's disruptive, it's chaotic, but it's also contradictory and in many ways inept. And I think the tariff fiasco was the greatest example of that so far, where he sort of, declared trade war on much of the world and then had to pull back because of what it was doing to the bond market. And the question is, how much more are we going to see of this? And I think with Canada, what's interesting is how he reacts to what Canada has done. Does he look at Mark Carney now as a tough guy and he's saying, well, they've turned out to be led by a tough guy, you've got to respect that? Or is he going to meet Carney head on and really try and force Canada to become a 51st state of America by using the considerable economic leverage that he has at his disposal? And does Canada actually have the advantage in the end in whatever battle that might lead to?
So, Crawford, with that kind of unpredictability in mind that Dominic's summing up for us, how hard a job does Rachel Reeves, Sir Keir Starmer have to strike this free trade deal with the US?
Oh, I think it's difficult. I think it'll be very difficult, not just for them, but for everybody. I mean, you could argue that in the Canadians' case, they need a deal because the big three auto manufacturers in the US need clarity about what they're doing. So that's something which is at the heart of their trade relationship between them, and therefore there are people inside the US system that, maybe will push the president to sort of stabilise that relationship. Whether it gets rid of all the tariffs is anybody's guess. For the rest of the world, you've got no way of knowing what they really want, and B, what their game plan is, even if they got it. So you can't easily negotiate with somebody in that situation. So I don't think it's going to be easy for anybody to cut a deal with the administration. And it's not going to be easy because the administration isn't clear what it actually intends to do and isn't giving any indications yet that it will stabilise. But the big question that everybody faces, ourselves included, over which we have no control or very little control, is what do they do with China? I mean, that's the fundamental question. They have to stabilise that relationship with China for the sake of the global economy. Are they minded to do so, or are they going to continue on a path which will lead the markets to react negatively again? It's completely unclear. So the rest of us can hardly think that we're going to resolve that problem, even if we do a patchwork deal or set of deals to get rid of the most egregious damage that the US has done.
I suppose the other problem with, anybody trying to do a deal with America now is that it's not good to its word anymore, is it? It's not seen to be... It hasn't honoured its signature on, the Iranian nuclear deal or the Paris climate change deal. He's now undone the deal he did himself with Canada and Mexico. And so, as a trade negotiator, I'd love to know what would you advise, Bill? Is it worth doing a deal with a country that it goes back on its word so quickly and easily?
Well, it's very fundamental. I mean, when I first came here, and part of my job was to train up a new generation of trade experts, because the UK hadn't had them being inside the EU, I used to say to people, there are two things that you have to worry about. Don't worry about what your own negotiating position is. I take it as an assumption you know what that is. One, you have to know what the other side wants, and you have to know that the other person on the other side of the table can deliver. At the moment, I would say for both of those, if you're dealing with the US, you don't know the answer to those questions. So I think it's very difficult to imagine, for the time being, and maybe for quite a long period of time, that anybody can have what I would call an enduring and comprehensive deal with this administration for the reasons that you describe. That doesn't mean to say that you can't have what I would call, and I don't like them being an old trade negotiator, but at the end of the day, you make do with what you can, some kind of patchwork arrangement in the meantime to try and get you through the next year or two so that things don't get worse and they maybe get some partial remedy. So I think I would find it hard to believe that most serious countries would have ambitions that were beyond that. Ideally, you want to get to a position where you can stabilise longer term, but it will take some time before you can have the confidence that A, they'll live up to their word, and B, they won't end up doing something worse.
So, Crawford, a couple of questions about the UK. What is there a greater opportunity for the British economy on? Rationalising the relationship with the EU, or a full free trade deal that has thus far been elusive with the US? What will boost the economy more?
Oh, well, I mean, the easy answer, and I'll give you the harder answer, just to make sure I'm not going to avoid it. The easy answer is it depends which kinds of deals you're talking in both cases. I mean, if you're not going to join the customs union and the single market, which the government says it's not going to do, your scope to do anything additional with the EU is rather limited. It doesn't mean to say it won't be valuable, and certainly for small businesses, there's a prospect that it would actually cut the transaction costs. But there isn't anything transformational, if you like, to do with the EU that hasn't been done if you're not going to go back into the customs union and the single market, which both governments that we've had recently say we're not going to do. So you can do something marginal, but it's not going to be transformational. With the US, at the moment, it looks like its damage limitation is the best you can hope for. Now, because we don't have a trade agreement with the US, in theory, an agreement with the US maybe might not be transformational, but certainly could have been, if you were dealing with an administration that really wanted a free trade agreement, very significant additionality. The problem is, at the moment, unless the secret conversations going on which aren't leaking in London, which is very unusual, and you guys aren't doing your job if you don't know, then I don't think that's in the works for the time being. That's just the reality. It doesn't mean to say that one day down the road in a different world it might be the case, but for the moment, it's kind of damage limitation seems to me to be the order of the day.
Got a couple more just final questions and then to Dom to wrap up. But Sir Crawford, a lot of the time we hear from the opposition that we were so close to a trade deal with the Trump administration in the first 4 years, and it's terrible of the government now that they haven't signed one within a week of coming to power. I guess two questions on that. Were we that close at the end of the first Trump term? And either way, are we dealing with the same beast today such that that's a legitimate criticism of the current government?
I think we're dealing with a very different beast. I mean, we were, you know, I should say generally we were probably 65% way there to a deal with the US last time around, and then we ran out of time because of the election. But it was a different beast. I mean, you still operated within parameters that were normal. Right now doesn't seem to be the case, and I can't see that changing in the short term. That doesn't mean to say that, you know, miraculously things can change, but at the moment, there doesn't seem to be a clarity from the US that they want to do a genuinely big deal. Now, if they did, and there was evidence that they wanted to do that, then I'm certainly one of those people who say, yes, you should be pulling the stops out to try and do that. But you would need to have very serious indications that they were serious. And right now, that's not the case. This is somebody who wants to tear down the existing arrangements, seemingly not wanting to build them up.
And my final question is, perhaps you're biased on this, but obviously you stepped away from your position in December. Do you think we'd be closer to a trade deal with the US if that hadn't happened?
It's nothing to do with me. I'd like to take responsibility for Trump, and I'm afraid I can't. That's the reality.
Sir Crawford, it's great to get your perspective this morning. Dom, very quick final question on this Trump 100 perspective. Polls in the short term have turned against him, certainly on the economy, but irrelevant for now.
Domestically, in America, yes, they've gone some sort of above 50%, so 54, 55% approval, 45 disapproval, and flipped around. So, yeah, things are moving very much against him. And in terms of, you know, where that is historically, he's doing worse than any other president at this stage in his second term or any term in office than we've seen for a long time in America. So I think a lot of that is to do with the domestic situation and economically. He sold himself very much as someone who's going to fix the economy. When I was there in Pennsylvania, the sort of key swing state, people were most preoccupied with the price of eggs, with the cost of living. They put aside the rest of it and the chaos and the memories of his first term in office, because that's what we're most worried about, and he's not delivering on that. And I think a lot of them see what he's doing with tariffs as unnecessary. It's not something he told them he would do as aggressively as he has been, and they're worried that's going to hurt them in their pocketbooks.
Dominic, as always, a pleasure. Sir Crawford, particular treat to have you, and thanks so much for joining us. We've got some other breaking news. Leah's got that for us.
Yeah, we're hearing that a fire's broken out at an electrical substation in West London, Maida to be precise. The issue that we're having is that the fire also spread across to a residential building, or the roof of a residential building, and around 80 people have been told they had to leave their homes. Pictures from the areas you can see show smoke bellowing into the air. Fire services, they said that they received around 170 calls this morning. It broke out just before we went on air with the breakfast show at 5:30. And teams from Paddington and Euston fire services are tackling with this fire now. At the moment, the cause of the fire is not yet known.
We'll take a quick break here. We're going to come back with more details on this breaking news for you in just a moment.
a secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
$1,500 movies. I don't want this flight to end. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Welcome back. We're going to end the hour with two bits of breaking news. We told you just before the break about a fire at a West London substation. We're going to get more on that for you in just a moment. But first, some separate breaking news of an explosion at a house in Yate near Bristol. Sadia's here with more on that. What can you tell us about that one?
So this happened this morning on a road called Lancaster Road in Yate, which is northeast of Bristol. The footage that we're seeing on social media shows a house in the midst of a terraced housing section, which is, completely gone. It's a dramatic explosion. There's fire, the roof is completely caved in and some of the neighbouring properties are also damaged. It is a suspected gas explosion. It's being described as having been dramatically blown up. And of course, this is the second such gas explosion that we're reporting on this month. In this case, we know that 3 people have been taken to hospital, not with life-threatening or life-changing injuries, but eyewitnesses have been reporting that there is debris everywhere and people standing out on the streets. We know that some homes have been evacuated. There's a refuge centre that is being set up, and Avon Fire and Rescue Services are urging people to avoid the area. Of course, there will be a heavy police and emergency services presence there. A cordon is in place. As I say, it's happened this morning.
Sadia, great stuff on that particular breaking news story. Let's remind you of the other one we brought you just before the break. Leah, bring us back up to speed and remind those people just joining us of exactly what we're doing. A fire at a West London power substation.
Yeah, that's correct. So this happened about 5:30 this morning. The London Fire Brigade receiving 170 calls from the public. The issue that transpired was that the residential buildings nearby this substation caught alight, the roof, and so 80 people had to be evacuated there to leave their home. The blaze happened on Aberdeen Place in Maida Vale. We're hearing that a transformer caught fire. 15 fire engines and around 100 firefighters were called. They're at the scene now. They're tackling that blaze. They're using a 32 turntable ladder and trying to get it under control. Crews from Paddington, Euston and surrounding stations, they're in attendance. The message, though, from the station commander on site, this is Paul Morgan, he's saying it's a very visible fire. You can see from the pictures there, smoke in the air there. And it's producing a lot of smoke. Residents being told, if they haven't been told to evacuate, stay inside, keep your windows closed while they get this under control. At the moment, we don't know what caused the fire, but it's an ongoing situation in Maida Vale.
Power at a power substation in West London, Aberdeen Place in Maida Vale. An electrical transformer there caught fire. As Leah says, we don't know the initial cause of that. 15 fire engines and 100 firefighters are on the scene there as 80 people have been evacuated because of that fire. Let's have a quick look at the weather before we leave you.
The perfect climate, wherever the destination. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Mostly dry with plenty of sunshine this week and will turn very warm. Temperatures look like peaking on Thursday at 29 Celsius or 84 Fahrenheit. It's mainly dry and sunny now, but northern Scotland is quite cloudy, while the Northern Isles are dull and damp. There are a few fog patches elsewhere. It'll stay mostly dry and sunny this morning, with the cloud over Scotland breaking away from the far north. Do expect some further drizzly outbreaks there, and it'll be mostly warm. Cooler, though, under the cloud of northern Scotland.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Up next, much more on those two breaking news stories on Sky News today. Gareth up with that, including the explosion in Bristol and the fire at a West London energy substation. Gareth up next.